Peoples of Earth. The solution of the problem of democracy, the authority of the people. The instrument of government. The instrument of government is the prime political problem confronting human communities. The problem of the instrument of government entails questions of the following kind. What form should the exercise of authority assume? How ought societies to organize themselves politically in the modern world? Even conflict within the family is often the result of the failure to resolve this problem of authority. It has clearly become more serious with the emergence of modern society. People today face this persistent question in new and pressing ways. Communities are exposed to the risks of uncertainty and suffer the grave consequences of wrong answers, yet none has succeeded in answering it conclusively and democratically.
The Green Book presents the ultimate solution to the problem of the proper instrument of government.
All political systems in the world today are a product of the struggle for power between alternative instruments of government. This struggle may be peaceful or armed, as is evidenced among classes, sects, tribes, parties, or individuals. The outcome is always the victory of a particular governing structure, be it that of an individual, group, party, or class, and the defeat of the people, the defeat of genuine democracy. Political struggle that results in the victory of a candidate with, for example, 51% of the votes leads a dictatorial governing body in the guise of a democracy, since 49% of the electorate is ruled by an instrument of government they did not vote for, but which has been imposed upon them. Such is dictatorship. Besides, this political conflict may produce a governing body that represents only a minority. For when votes are distributed among several candidates, though one polls more than any other, the sum of the votes received by those who received fewer votes might well constitute an overwhelming majority. However, the candidate with fewer votes wins, and his success is regarded as legitimate and democratic. In actual fact, dictatorship is established under the cover of false democracy. This is the reality of the political systems prevailing in the world today. They are dictatorial systems, and it is evident that they falsify genuine democracy. Parliaments. Parliaments are the backbone of that conventional democracy prevailing in the world today. Parliaments is a misrepresentation of the people, and parliamentary systems are a false solution to the problem of democracy. A parliament is originally founded to represent the people, but this is in itself undemocratic, as democracy means the authority of the people and not unauthority acting on their behalf. The mere existence of a parliament means the absence of the people. True democracy exists only through the direct participation of the people and not through the activity of their representatives. Parliaments have been a legal barrier between the people and the exercise of authority, excluding the masses from meaningful politics and monopolizing sovereignty in their place. People are left with only a facade of democracy, manifested in long queues to cast their election ballots. To lay bare the character of parliaments, one has to examine their origin. They are either elected from constituencies, a party or a coalition of parties, or are appointed. But all of these procedures are undemocratic, for dividing the population into constituencies means that one member of parliament represents thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people, depending on the size of the population. It also means that a member keeps few popular organizational links with the electors, since he, like other members, is considered a representative of the whole people. This is what the prevailing traditional democracy requires. The masses are completely isolated from the representative, and he in turn is totally removed from them. Immediately after winning the electors' votes, the representative takes over the people's sovereignty and acts on their behalf. The prevailing traditional democracy endows the member of parliament with sacredness and immunity which are denied the rest of the people. Parliaments therefore have become a means of plundering and usurping the authority of the people. It has thus become the right of the people to struggle through popular or unpopular revolution to destroy such instruments, the so-called parliamentary assemblies, which usurp democracy and sovereignty and which stifle the will of the people. The masses have the right to proclaim reverberantly the new principle: no representation in lieu of the people. If parliament is formed from one party as a result of its winning an election, it becomes parliament of the winning party and not of the people. It represents the party and not the people, and the executive power of the parliament becomes that of the victorious party and not of the people. The same is true of the parliament of proportional representation, in which each party holds a number of seats proportional to their success in the popular vote. The members of the parliament represent their respective parties and not the people, and the power established by such a coalition is the power of the combined parties and not that of the people. Under such systems, the people are the victims whose votes are vied for by exploitative competing factions who dupe the people into political circuses that are outwardly noisy and frantic, but inwardly powerless and irrelevant. Alternatively, the people are seduced into standing in long, apathetic, silent queues to cast their ballots in the same way that they throw waste paper into dustbins. This is the traditional democracy prevalent in the whole world, whether it is represented by a one-party, two-party, multi-party, or non-party system. Thus, it is clear that representation is a fraud. Moreover, since the system of elected parliaments is based on propaganda to win votes, it is a demagogic system in the real sense of the word. Votes can't be bought and falsified. Poor people are unable to compete in the election campaigns, and the result is that only the rich get elected. Assemblies constituted by appointment or hereditary succession do not fall under any form of democracy. Philosophers, thinkers, and writers advocated the theory of representative parliaments at a time when peoples were unconsciously herded like sheep by kings, sultans, and conquerors. The ultimate aspiration of the people of those times was to have someone represent them before such rulers. When even this aspiration was rejected, people waged bitter and protracted struggles to attain this goal. After the successful establishment of the age of republics and the beginning of the era of the masses, it is unthinkable that democracy should mean the electing of only a few representatives to act on behalf of great masses. This is an obsolete structure. Authority must be in the hands of all of the people. The most tyrannical dictatorships the world has known have existed under the aegis of parliaments. The party. The party is a contemporary form of dictatorship. It is the modern instrument of dictatorial government. The party is the rule of a part over the whole. As a party is not an individual, it creates a superficial democracy by establishing assemblies, committees, and propaganda through its members. The party is not a democratic instrument because it is composed only of those people who have common interests, a common perception, or a shared culture, or those who belong to the same region or share the same belief. They form a party to achieve their ends, impose their will, or extend the dominion of their beliefs, values, and interests to the society as a whole. A party's aim is to achieve power under the pretext of carrying out its program. Democratically, none of these parties should govern a whole people who constitute a diversity of interests, ideas, temperaments, regions, and beliefs. The party is a dictatorial instrument of government that enables those with common outlooks or interests to rule the people as a whole. Within the community, the party represents a minority. The purpose of forming a party is to create an instrument to rule the people, i.e. to rule over non-members of the party. The party is fundamentally based on an arbitrary, authoritarian concept, the domination of the members of the party over the rest of the people. The party presupposes that its accession to power is the way to attain its ends and assumes that its objectives are also those objectives of the people. This is the theory justifying party dictatorship and is the basis of any dictatorship. No matter how many parties exist, the theory remains valid. The existence of many parties intensifies the struggle for power, and this results in the neglect of any achievement for the people and of any socially beneficial plans. Such actions are presented as a justification to undermine the position of the ruling party so that an opposing party can replace it. The parties very seldom resort to arms in their struggle, but rather denounce and denigrate the actions of each other. This is a battle which is inevitably waged at the expense of the higher vital interests of the society. Some, if not all, of those higher interests will fall prey to the struggle for power between instruments of government, for the destruction of those interests supports the opposition in their argument against the ruling party or parties. In order to rule, the opposition party has to defeat the existing instrument of government. To do so, the opposition must minimize the government's achievements and cast doubt on its plans, even though those plans may be beneficial to society. Consequently, the interests and programs of the society become the victims of the party's struggle for power. Such struggle is therefore politically, socially, and economically destructive to the society, despite the fact that it creates political activity. Thus, the struggle results in the victory of another instrument of government, the fall of one party and the rise of another. It is, in fact, a defeat for the people, i.e., a defeat for democracy. Furthermore, parties can be bribed and corrupted from either inside or outside. It sounds like they corrupt all the way through. Originally, the party is formed ostensibly to represent the people. Subsequently, the party leadership becomes representative of the membership, and the leader represents the party elite. It becomes clear that this partisan game is a deceitful farce based on a false form of democracy. It has a selfish authoritarian character based on maneuvers, intrigues, and political games. Justin, this confirms the fact that the party system is a modern instrument of dictatorship. The party system is an outright unconvincing dictatorship, one which the world has not yet surpassed. It is, in fact, the dictatorship of the modern age. The parliament of the winning party is indeed a parliament of the party, for the executive power formed by this parliament is the power of the party over the people. Party power, which is supposedly for the good of the whole people, is actually the arch enemy of a fraction of the people, namely the opposition party or parties and their supporters. The opposition is therefore not a popular check on the ruling party, but rather is itself opportunistically seeking to replace the ruling party. According to modern democracy, the legitimate check on the ruling party is the parliament, the majority of whose members are from that ruling party. That is to say, control is in the hands of the ruling party, and the power is in the hands of the controlling party. Thus, the deception, falseness, and invalidity of the political theories dominant in the world today become obvious. From these emerge contemporary, conventional democracy. The party represents a segment of the people, but the sovereignty of the people is indivisible. The party allegedly governs on behalf of the people, but in reality, the true principle of democracy is based on the notion that there can be no representation in lieu of the people. Representation in lieu of people. Those are both in quotes. I think those are his promoted slogans. Thank you, Gaddafi. The party system is the modern equivalent of the tribal or sectarian system. A society governed by one party is similar to one which is governed by one tribe or one sect. The party, as shown, represents the perception of a certain group of people or the interests of one group in society or one belief or one region. Such a party is a minority compared with the whole people, just as the tribe and the sect are. The minority has narrow common sectarian interests and beliefs from which a common outlook is formed. Only the blood relationship distinguishes a tribe from a party, and indeed, a tribe might also be the basis for the foundation of a party. There is no difference between party struggle and tribal or sectarian struggles for power. Just as tribal and sectarian rule is politically unacceptable and inappropriate, likewise the rule under a party system. Both follow the same path and lead to the same end. The negative and destructive effects of the tribal or sectarian struggle on society is identical to the negative and destructive effects of the party struggle. Oh, I got class. The political class system is the same as a party, tribal, or sectarian system, since a class dominates society in the same way that a party, tribe, or sect would. Classes like parties, sects, or tribes are groups of people within society who share common interests. Common interests arise from the existence of a group of people bound together by blood relationship, belief, culture, locality, or standard of living. Classes, parties, sects, and tribes emerge because blood relationship, social rank, economic interest, standard of living, belief, culture, and locality create a common outlook to achieve a common end. Thus, social structures in the form of classes, parties, tribes, or sects emerge. These eventually develop into political entities directed towards the realization of the goals of that group. In all cases, the people are neither the class, the party, the tribe, nor the sect, for these are no more than a segment of the people and constitute a minority. If a class, a party, a tribe, or a sect dominate a society, then the dominant system becomes a dictatorship. However, a class or a tribal coalition is preferable to a party coalition since societies originally consisted of tribal communities. One seldom finds a group of people who do not belong to a tribe, and all people belong to a specific class. But no party or parties embrace all of the people, and therefore the party or party coalition represents a minority compared to the masses outside their membership. Under genuine democracy, there can be no justification for any one class to subdue other classes for its interests. Similarly, no party, tribe, or sect can crush others for their own interests. To allow such actions abandons the logic of democracy and justifies resort to the use of force. Such policies of suppression are dictatorial because they are not in the interest of the whole society, which consists of more than one class, tribe, or sect, or the members of one party. There is no justification for such actions, though the dictatorial argument is that society actually consists of numerous segments, one of which must undertake the liquidation of all the others to remain solely in power. This exercise is not accordingly in the interest of the whole society, but rather in the interest of a specific class, tribe, sect, party, or those who wish to speak for the rest of society. Such an act is basically aimed at the member of the society who does not belong to the party, class, tribe, or sect which carries out the liquidation. A society torn apart by party feud is similar to one which is torn apart by tribal or sectarian conflicts. A party that is formed in the name of a class inevitably becomes a substitute for that class and continues in the process of spontaneous transformation until it becomes hostile to the class that it replaces. Any class which inherits a society also inherits its characteristics. If the working class, for example, subdues all other classes of a particular society, it then becomes its only heir and forms its material and social base. The heir acquires the traits of those from whom it inherits, though this may not be evident all at once. With the passage of time, characteristics of the other eliminated classes will emerge within the ranks of the working class itself. The members of the new society will assume the attitudes and perspectives appropriate to their newly evolved characteristics. Thus, the working class will develop a separate society possessing all of the contradictions of the old society in the first stage. The material standard and importance of the members become unequal. Thereafter, groups emerge which automatically become classes that are the same as the classes that were eliminated. Thus, the struggle for domination of the society begins again. Each group of people, each faction, and each new class will all vie to become the instrument of government. Being social in nature, the material base of any society is changeable. The instrument of government of this material base may be sustained for some time, but it will eventually become obsolete as new material and social standards evolve to form a new material base. Any society which undergoes a class conflict may at one time have been a one-class society, but through evolution inevitably becomes a multi-class society. The class that expropriates and acquires the possession of others to maintain power for itself will soon find that through evolution it will be itself subject to change as though it were the society as a whole. In summary, all attempts at unifying the material base of a society in order to solve the problem of government, or at putting an end to the struggle in favor of a party, class, sect, or tribe have failed. All endeavors aimed at appeasing the masses through the election of representatives or through parliaments have equally failed. To continue such practices would be a waste of time and a mockery of the people. Plebiscites. Plebiscites are a fraud against democracy. Those who vote yes or no do not, in fact, express their free will, but rather are silenced by the modern conception of democracy, as they are not allowed to say more than yes or no. Such a system is oppressive and tyrannical. Those who vote no should express their reasons and why they did not say yes, and those who say yes should verify such agreement and why they did not vote no. Both sides should state their wishes and be able to justify their vote. What then is the path to be taken by humanity in order to conclusively rid itself of the elements of dictatorship and tyranny? The intricate problem in the case of democracy is reflected in the nature of the instruments of government, which is demonstrated by conflicts of classes, parties, and individuals. The elections and plebiscites were invented to cover the failure of these unsuccessful experiments to solve this problem. The solution lies in finding an instrument of government other than those which are subject to conflict and which represent only one faction of society. That is to say, an instrument of government which is not a party class, sect, or a tribe, but an instrument of government which is the people as a whole. In other words, we seek an instrument of government which neither represents the people nor speaks in their name. There can be no representation in lieu of the people, and representation is a fraud. If such an instrument can be found, then the problem is solved and true popular democracy is realized. Thus, humankind would have terminated the eras of tyranny and dictatorships and replaced them with the authority of the people.
The Green Book presents the ultimate solution to the problem of the proper instrument of government.
See here. I would like to read my Green Book. I would, sir. And indicates for the masses the path upon which they can advance from the age of dictatorship to that of genuine democracy. This new theory is based on the authority of the people without representation or deputation. It achieves direct democracy in an orderly and effective form. It is superior to older attempts at direct democracy, which were impractical because they lacked popular organizations at base levels. Popular conferences and people's committees. PCP. Hello and welcome to the Popular Conference of the Peoples. PCP is not the recommended drug, though there may be something that might allow you to feel more in communion with a broad spectrum of people who, you might not know. The thing that has consistently irked me is that it seems like the internet allows for direct democracy, but they don't utilize it for it in any way whatsoever. And it seems like even now it's not being thrown around as an option. So I think that's the thing that they're scared of most of all is that we could replace the need for government because they will be outsourced by the technology, because we will have direct control and access to the things that affect us. Like, why do we need to elect leaders who are idiots, most of them, to make poor decisions on our behalf, using our money, ruining our presents and our futures, practically our pasts, because of how much depression impacts one's ability to recall the good old leftists. Popular conferences and people's committees. Popular conferences are the only means to achieve popular democracy. Any system of government contrary to this method, the method of popular conferences, is undemocratic. All the prevailing systems of government in the world today will remain undemocratic unless they adopt this method. Popular conferences are the end of this journey of the masses in quest of democracy. Popular conferences and people's committees are the fruition of the people's struggle for democracy. Popular conferences and people's committees are not creations of the imagination. They are the product of thought which has absorbed all human experiments to achieve democracy. Direct democracy, if put into practice, is indisputably the ideal method of government. Because it is impossible to gather all people, however small the population, in one place so that they can discuss, discern, and decide policies, nations departed from direct democracy, which became a utopian ideal detached from reality. It was replaced by various theories of government such as representative councils, party coalitions, and plebiscites, all of which isolated the masses and prevented them from managing their political affairs. These instruments of government, the individual, the class, the sect, the tribe, the parliament, and the party struggling to achieve power, have plundered the sovereignty of the masses and monopolized politics and authority for themselves. The Green Book guides the masses to an unprecedented practical system of direct democracy. No two intelligent people can dispute the fact that direct democracy is the ideal, but until now, no practical method for its implementation has been devised. The third universal theory, however, now provides us with a practical application to direct democracy. The problem of democracy in the world will finally be solved. All that is left before the masses now is the struggle to eliminate all prevailing forms of dictatorial governments, be they parliament, sect, tribe, class, one-party system, two-party system, or multi-party systems, which falsely call themselves democracies. True democracy has but one method and one theory. The dissimilarity and diversity of the systems claiming to be democratic do, in fact, provide evidence that they are not so. Authority of the people has but one face, which can only be realized through popular conferences and people's committees. There can be no democracy without popular conferences and committees everywhere. First, the people are divided into basic popular conferences. Each basic popular conference chooses its secretariat. The secretariat of all popular conferences together form non-basic popular conferences. Subsequently, the masses of the basic popular conferences select administrative people's committees to replace government administration. All public institutions are run by people's committees, which will be accountable to the basic popular conferences, which dictate the policy and supervise its execution. Thus, both administration and the supervision become the people's, and the outdated definition of democracy, democracy is the supervision of the government by the people, becomes obsolete. It will be replaced by the true definition, democracy is the supervision of the people by the people. All citizens who are members of these popular conferences belong vocationally and functionally to various sectors and have therefore to form themselves into their own professional popular conferences, in addition to being, by virtue of citizenship, members of the basic popular conference or people's committees. Subjects dealt with by the popular conferences and people's committees will eventually take their final shape in the General People's Congress, which brings forth the secretariats of the popular conferences and people's committees. Resolutions of the General People's Congress, which meets annually or periodically, are passed on to the popular conferences and people's committees, which undertake the execution of those resolutions through the responsible committees, which are in turn accountable to the basic popular conferences. The General People's Congress is not a gathering of persons or members such as those of parliaments, but rather a gathering of the popular conferences and people's committees. Thus, the problem of the instrument of government is naturally solved, and all dictatorial instruments disappear. The people become the instruments of government, and the dilemma of democracy in the world is conclusively solved. The law of society. Law represents the other problem, parallel to that of the instrument of government, which has not been resolved. Although it was dealt with in different periods of history, the problem still persists today. For a committee or an assembly to be empowered to draft the law of society is both invalid and undemocratic. It is also invalid and undemocratic for the law of society to be abrogated or amended by individual, a committee, or an assembly. What then is the law of society? Who drafts it? And what is its relevance to democracy? The natural law of any society is grounded in either tradition, custom, or religion. Any other attempt to draft law outside these two sources is invalid and illogical. Constitutions cannot be considered the law of society. A constitution is fundamentally a man-made positive law and lacks the natural source from which it must derive its justification. The problem of freedom in the modern age is that constitutions have become the laws of society. These constitutions are based solely on the premises of the instrument of dictatorial rule prevailing in the world today, ranging from the individual to the party. Proof of these are the differences existing in various constitutions, although human freedom is one and the same. The reason for the differences is the variation in the assumptions and values implicit in diverse instruments of government. This is how freedom becomes vulnerable under contemporary forms of government. The method by which a specific modality of government seeks to dominate the people is contained in the Constitution. The people are compelled to accept it by virtue of the laws derived from that Constitution, which is itself the product of the tendencies within particular instruments of government. The laws of the dictatorial instruments of government have replaced the natural laws, i.e. positive law has replaced natural law. Consequently, ethical standards have become confused. The human being is essentially physically and emotionally the same everywhere. Because of this fact, natural laws are applicable to all. However, constitutions as conventional law do not perceive human beings equally. This view has no justification except for the fact that it reflects the will of the instrument of government, be it an individual, an assembly, a class, or a party. That is why constitutions change when an alteration in the instruments of government takes place, indicating that a constitution is not natural law but reflects the drive of the instrument of government to serve its own purpose. The abrogation of natural laws from human societies and their replacement by conventional laws is the fundamental danger that threatens freedom. Any ruling system must be made subservient to natural laws, not the reverse. The fundamental law of society must not be subject to historical drafting or composition. Its importance lies in being the decisive criterion in light of which truth and falsehood, right and wrong, and individual rights and duties can be judged. Freedom is threatened unless society adheres to sacred laws with established rules that are not subject to alteration or change by any instrument of government. It is rather the responsibility of the instrument of government to adhere to the laws of society. Unfortunately, people the world over are currently ruled by man-made laws that can be changed or abrogated depending upon the struggle for power among competing forms of government. Conducting plebiscites on constitutions is often insufficient. Plebiscites are essentially a counterfeit of democracy, since a yes or no is the only option. Moreover, under man-made law, people are compelled to vote on these plebiscites. Conducting a plebiscite on a constitution does not necessarily make the constitution the law of society. In other words, the status of a constitution will not be altered by a plebiscite. It will remain no more than the subject of a plebiscite. The law of society is an eternal human heritage that does not belong only to the living. Therefore, drafting a constitution or plebiscite on it is a mockery. The catalogs of man-made laws emanating from man-made constitutions are fraught with physical penalties directed against human beings, while tradition contains few such measures. Tradition lays down moral, non-physical penalties that conform to the intrinsic nature of humanity. Religion contains tradition and absorbs it, and tradition is a manifestation of the natural life of people. Its teachings comprise basic social guidelines and answers to the fundamental questions of existence. Most physical penalties are deferred to a future judgment. This is the most appropriate law, affording due respect to the human being. Religion does not provide for prompt penalties, save in certain compelling instances necessary to the well-being of society. Religion contains tradition, and tradition is an expression of the natural life of the people. Therefore, religion is an affirmation of natural laws which are discerned therein. Laws which are not premised on religion and tradition are merely an invention by man to be tried and used against his fellow man. Consequently, such laws are invalid because they do not emanate from the natural source of tradition and religion. Who supervises the conduct of society? Anyway, the question arises, who has the right to supervise society and to point out deviations that may occur from the laws of society? Democratically, no one group can claim this right on behalf of society. Therefore, society alone supervises itself. It is dictatorial for any individual or group to claim the right of the supervision of the laws of the society, which is democratically the responsibility of the society as a whole. This can be arrived at through the democratic instrument of the government that results from the organization of the society itself into basic popular conferences, and through the government of these people through people's committees and the General People's Congress, the National Congress, where secretariats of the popular conferences and the people's committees convene. In accordance with this theory, the people become the instrument of government and, in turn, become their own supervisors. Society thus secures self-supervision over its laws. How can society redirect its course when deviations from the laws occur? If the instrument of government is dictatorial, as is the case in the world's political systems today, society's awareness of deviation from its laws is expressed only through violence to redirect its course, i.e., revolution against the instruments of government. Violence and revolution, even though they reflect the sentiments of society regarding deviation, do not constitute an exercise in which the whole of society takes part. Rather, violence and revolution are carried out by those who have the capability and courage to take the initiative and proclaim the will of society. However, this unilateral approach is dictatorial because the revolutionary initiative in itself provides the opportunity for a new instrument of government representing the people to arise. This means that the governing structure remains dictatorial. In addition, violence and effecting change by force are both undemocratic, even though they take place as a reaction against an undemocratic prior condition. The society that revolves around this concept is backward. What, then, is the solution? The solution lies in the people being themselves the instrument of government, whose authority is derived from basic popular conferences and the General People's Congress. In eliminating government administration and replacing it by people's committees, and finally in the General People's Congress becoming a truly national convention where basic popular conferences and people's committees convene. In such a system, if deviation takes place, it is then rectified by a total democratic revision and not through the use of force. The process here is not a voluntary option for social change and treatment of social ills. It is rather an instrument, an inevitable result of the nature of this democratic system, because in such a case there is no outside group who can be held responsible for such deviation or against whom violence can be directed. The press. The real news. An individual has the right to express himself or herself even if he or she behaves irrationally to demonstrate his or her insanity. Corporate bodies too have the right to express their corporate identity. The former represent only themselves and the latter represent those who share their corporate identity. Since society consists of private individuals and corporate bodies, the expression, for example, by an individual of his or her insanity does not mean that the other members of society are insane. Such expression reflects only in the individual's character. Likewise, corporate expression reflects only the interests or views of the making up the corporate body. For instance, a tobacco company, despite the fact that what it produces is harmful to health, expresses the interests of those who make up the company. The press is a means of expression for society. It is not a means of expression for private individuals or corporate bodies. Therefore, logically and democratically, it should not belong to either one of them. A newspaper owned by any individual is his or her own and expresses only his or her own point of view. Any claim that a newspaper represents public opinion is groundless because it actually expresses the viewpoint of that private individual. Democratically, private individuals should not be permitted to own any public means of publication or information. However, they have the right to express themselves by any means, even irrationally, to prove their insanity. Any journal issued by a professional sector, for example, is only a means of expression of that particular social group. It presents their own points of view and not that of the general public. This applies to all other corporate and private individuals in society. The democratic press is that which is issued by a people's committee comprising all the groups of society. Only in this case and not otherwise will the press or any other information medium be democratic, expressing the viewpoints of the whole society and representing all its groups. If medical professionals issue a journal, it must be purely medical. Similarly, this applies to other groups. Private individuals have the right to express only their own views and not anyone else's opinions. What is known as the problem of the freedom of the press in the world will be radically and democratically solved. Because it is byproduct of the problem of democracy generally, the problem of freedom of the press cannot be solved independently of that of democracy and society as a whole. Therefore, the only solution to the persistent problem of democracy is through the third universal theory. According to this theory, the democratic system is a cohesive structure whose foundations are firmly laid on basic popular conferences and people's committees, which convene in a general people's congress. This is absolutely the only form of genuine democratic society. In summary, the era of the masses, which follows the age of the republic, excites the feelings and dazzles the eyes. But even though the vision of this era denotes genuine freedom of the masses and their happy emancipation from the bonds of external authoritarian structures, it warns also of the dangers of a period of chaos and demagoguery, and the threat of a return to the authority of the individual, the sect and party, instead of the authority of the people. Theoretically, this is genuine democracy, but realistically, the strong always rules, i.e. the stronger party in the society is the one that rules. Part 2. The solution of the economic problem. It's like it's socialism. The economic basis of the third universal theory. Important historical developments contributing to the solution of the problem of work and wages. The relationship between producers and owners, workers and employers have occurred in recent history. These developments include the determination of fixed working hours, overtime pay, leaves, minimum wage, profit sharing, the participation of workers in administration, the banning of arbitrary dismissal, social security, the right to strike, and other provisions contained in labor codes of almost all contemporary legislation. Of no less significance are changes in the realm of ownership, such as the enactment of laws transferring private ownership to the state and also those limiting income. Despite these not inconsiderable developments in the history of economics, the problem still fundamentally exists, even though it has been made less severe than in past centuries through improvements, refinements, and developments that have brought many benefits to the workers. However, the economic problem still persists unsolved in the world. Attempts aimed at ownership have failed to solve the problems of producers. They are still wage earners, despite the state ownership, which may vary from the extreme right to the extreme left to the center of the political spectrum. Attempts to improve wages were equally significant to those that were aimed at the transferal of ownership. In the wake of the Industrial Revolution, benefits from wage negotiations secured for workers certain privileges that were guaranteed by legislation and protected by trade unions, thus improving the lot of the workers. As time passed, workers, technicians, and administrators have acquired certain rights which were previously unattainable. However, in reality, the economic problem still persists. Attempts that were aimed at wages were contrived and reformative and have failed to provide a solution. They were more of a charity than a recognition of the rights of the workers. Why do workers receive wages? Because they carry out a production process for the benefit of others who hire them to produce a certain product. In this case, they do not consume what they produce, rather they are compelled to concede their product for wages. Hence the sound rule, those who produce, consume. Wage earners, however improved their wages may be, are a type of slave. Wage earners are but slaves to the masters who hire them. They are temporary slaves, and their slavery lasts as long as they work for wages from employers, be they individuals or the state. The worker's relationship to the owner or the productive establishment and to their own interests is similar under all prevailing conditions in the world today, regardless of whether ownership is right or left. Even publicly owned establishments give workers wages as well as other social benefits similar to the charity endowed by the rich owners of the economic establishment upon those who work for them. Unlike the privately owned establishment where income benefits the owner, the claim that the income from the public-owned establishment benefits all of the society, including the workers, is true only if we take into consideration the general welfare of the society and not the private well-being of the workers. Further, we would have to assume that the political authority controlling ownership is that of all the people, practiced through the popular conferences and people's committees, and not the authority of one class, one party, several parties, one sect, tribe, family, individual, or any form of representative authority. Failing this, what is received directly by the workers with respect to their own interests in the form of wages, percentage of profits, or social benefits is the same as that received by workers in a private corporation. In both instances, the producers are wage earners, despite the difference in ownership. Thus, this change in ownership has not solved the problems of the producer's right to benefit directly from what he produces and not through the society nor through wages. The proof thereof is the fact that producers are still wage earners despite the change in this state of ownership. The ultimate solution lies in abolishing the wage system, emancipating people from its bondage, and reverting to the natural laws which defined relationships before the emergence of classes, forms of government, and man-made laws. These natural laws are the only measures that ought to govern human relationships. These natural rules have produced natural socialism based on equality among the components of economic production and have maintained public consumption almost equal to natural production among individuals. The exploitation of man by man and the possession by some individuals of more of the general wealth than their needs required is a manifest departure from the natural rule and the beginning of distortion and corruption in the life of the human community. It heralds the start of the exploitative society. If we analyze the factors of economic production from ancient times to the present, we always find that they essentially consist of certain basic production components, i.e., raw materials, means of production, and a producer. The natural rule of equality requires that each of these components receives a share of this production. Because production cannot be achieved without the essential role of each of these components, it has to be equally divided amongst them. The preponderance of one of them contravenes the natural rule of equality and becomes an encroachment upon the others' rights. Thus, each must be awarded an equal share, regardless of the number of components in the process of production. If the components are 2, each receives half of the production. If 3, then 1/3. Applying this natural rule to both ancient and modern situations, we arrive at the following. At the stage of manual production, the process of production resulted from raw material and a producer. Later, new means of production were added to the process. Animals, utilized as power units, constitute a good example. Gradually, machines replaced animals, types and amounts of raw materials evolved from the simple and inexpensive to the valuable and complex. Likewise, the unskilled workers became skilled workers and engineers, their former huge numbers dwindling to a few specialized technicians. Despite the fact that components have qualitatively and quantitatively changed, their essential role in production has remained basically unaltered. For example, iron ore, a component of both past and present production, was manufactured primitively by ironsmiths into knives, axes, spears, etc. The same iron ore is now manufactured by engineers and technicians by means of smelting furnaces into all kinds of machines, engines, and vehicles. The animal, horse, mule, camel, or the like, which was a component of production, has been replaced by factories and huge machines. Production, based upon primitive tools, is now founded upon sophisticated technical instruments. Despite these tremendous changes, the components of natural production remain basically the same. This consistency inevitably necessitates returning to sound natural rules to solve the economic problems that are the result of all previous historical attempts to formulate solutions that ignore these rules. All previous historical theories tackled the economic problem either from the angle of ownership of any of the components of production or from that of wages for production. They failed to solve the real problem, the problem of production itself. Thus, the most important characteristic of economic order prevailing in the world today is a wage system that deprives the workers of any right to the products being produced, be it for the society or for a private establishment. An industrial establishment is composed of material for production, machines, and workers. Production is achieved by workers manufacturing materials and using machines. Thus, manufactured goods would not have been ready for use and consumption had they not gone through a production process requiring raw materials, factories, and workers. Clearly, without basic raw materials, the factory cannot operate, and without the raw materials will not be manufactured. Likewise, without producers, the factory comes to a halt. Thus, the three factors are equally essential to the process of production, and without them, there can be no productivity. The absence of any one of these components cannot be replaced by the others. Therefore, the natural rule necessitates each component receiving an equal share of the benefits of production. It is not only the factory that is important, but those who consume its products as well. The same is applicable to agricultural production processes resulting from only 2 components, man and land. The product must be divided equally into 2 shares congruent with the number of production components. Furthermore, if any additional mode, mechanical or otherwise, is utilized in the process, production must be equally divided into 3 shares, the land, the farmer, and the means of production. Consequently, a socialist system emerges under which all production processes are governed by this natural rule. The producers are the workers. They are called producers because the term workers, laborer, and toiler have become invalid. The traditional definition is revised because workers are undergoing qualitative and quantitative changes. The working class is declining proportionately to the advancement of science and technology. Tasks once performed by a number of workers are now being carried out by a single machine. Operating a machine requires fewer, if any, workers. This has brought about a quantitative change in the labor force, while the replacement of physical force by technical skill has resulted in a qualitative change in the labor force. The labor force has become a component of the production process. As a result of technical advancement, multitudes of unskilled toilers have been transformed into limited numbers of engineers, technicians, and scientists. Consequently, trade unionists will subsequently disappear and be replaced by syndicates of engineers and technicians. Scientific advancement is an irreversible gain for humankind. Thanks to this process, illiteracy will be eliminated and unskilled workers, but what will they read? And unskilled workers will become a temporary phenomenon destined to gradually disappear. However, even in this new environment, persons will always remain the basic component in the production process. Need. The freedom of a human being is lacking if his or her needs are controlled by others, for need may lead to the enslavement of one person by another. Furthermore, exploitation is caused by need.
Need is an intrinsic problem, and conflict is initiated by the control of one's needs by another.
Housing is an essential need both for the individual and the family and should not be owned by others. Living in another's house, whether paying rent or not, compromises freedom. Attempts made by various countries to solve the housing problem did not provide a definite solution because such attempts did not target the ultimate solution, the necessity that people own their own dwellings, but rather offered their reduction, increase, or standardization of rent, whether it went privately or publicly owned enterprises. In a socialist society, no one, including society itself, has the right to control people's needs. No one has the right to acquire a house additional to his or her own dwelling and that of his or her own heirs for the purpose of renting it because the additional house is, in fact, a need of somebody else. Acquiring it for such a purpose is the beginning of controlling the needs of others, and, quote, in need freedom is latent. Income. Income is an imperative need for man. In a socialist society, it should not be in the form of wages from any source or charity from anyone. In this society, there are no wage earners, but only partners. One's income is a private matter and should either be managed privately to meet one's needs or be a share from a production process of which one is an essential component. It should not be a wage in return for production, because in the eco-paradise, we got to produce less. Means of transportation. Transportation is also a necessity to the individual and to the family. It should not be owned by others. In a socialist society, no person or authority has the right to own a means of transportation for the purpose of renting it, for this also means controlling the needs of others. Land. Land is the private property of none. Rather, everyone has the right to beneficially utilize it by working, farming, or pasturing as long as he or his heirs live on it, to satisfy their needs, but without employing others with or without a wage. If lands were privately owned, only the living would have a share on it. Land is permanent, while those who benefit from the land undergo in the course of time changes in profession, capabilities, and existence. The aspiration of the new socialist society is to create a society which is happy because it is free. This can only be achieved by satisfying man's material and spiritual needs, and that, in turn, comes about through the liberation of those needs from the control of others. Satisfaction of these needs must be attained without exploiting or enslaving others, otherwise the aspirations of the new socialist society are contradicted. Thus, the citizen in this new society secures his material needs either through self-employment or by being a partner in a collectively owned establishment or by rendering public service to society which in return provides for his material needs. Economic activity in the new socialist society is a productive one aimed at the satisfaction of material needs. It is not an unproductive activity, nor one which seeks profit for surplus savings beyond the satisfaction of such needs. This, according to the new socialist basis, is unacceptable. The legitimate purpose for private economic activities is only to satisfy one's needs because the wealth of the world, as well as that of each individual society, is finite at each stage. No one has the right to undertake an economic activity whereby wealth exceeding the satisfaction of one's needs can be amassed. Such accumulations are in fact the deprived right of others. One only has the right to save from his own production and not by employing others, or to save at the expense of his or her own needs and not of others. If economic activity is allowed to extend beyond the satisfaction of needs, some will acquire more than required for their needs, while others will be deprived. The savings which are in excess of one's needs are another person's share of the wealth of society. Allowing private economic activity to amass wealth beyond the satisfactions of one's needs and employing others to satisfy one's needs to beyond or secure savings is the very fucking essence of exploitation. Work for wages, in addition to being enslavement, as previously mentioned, is void of incentives because the producer is a wage earner and not a partner. Self-employed persons are undoubtedly devoted to their work because from it they satisfy their material needs. Likewise, those who work in a collective establishment are also devoted to their work because they are partners in it and they satisfy their material needs from the production. Whoever works for a wage, on the other hand, has little incentive to work. Work for wages has failed to solve the problem of motivation for increasing and developing production. Whether it is a service or goods production, work for wages is continually deteriorating because it is performed by unmotivated wage earners. Whipped slaves. Examples of wage labor for the society, for private enterprise, and self-employment. First example. A worker produces 10 apples for society. The society gives him 1 apple for his production, and in it fully satisfies his needs. B. A worker produces 10 apples for society. The society gives him 1 apple for his production, which does not satisfy his needs. Second example. A worker produces 10 apples for another person and gets wages less than the price of 1 apple. Third example, a worker produces 10 apples for himself. The conclusion. In the first example, because the worker's wages are limited to 1 unit which satisfy his needs, he has no incentive to increase his production. Thus, all the labor force that works for society is psychologically apathetic. B. The worker has no incentive even to produce because he cannot satisfy his needs from the wages. However, he continues working without any incentives because generally, like all members, he is forced to acquiesce to the working conditions of the society. In the second example, the worker works basically to get wages and not to produce. Since his wages cannot satisfy his needs, the choices are either to look for another master to get a better price for his work or be forced, as a matter of survival, to remain where he is. In the third example, the self-employed alone is the one who produces eagerly and voluntarily. In a socialist society, there is no possibility for private production to exceed the satisfaction of one's needs because satisfaction of needs at the expense or by means of others is not permitted. Moreover, socialist establishments operate only for the satisfaction of the needs of society. Accordingly, the third example demonstrates the sound basis of its economic production. However, in all instances, even the bad ones, production is associated with survival. The proof thereof is that even though in capitalist societies production accumulates and expands in the hands of only a few owners who do not work but exploit the efforts of others, the toilers are still forced to produce in order to survive. However, the Green Book not only solves the problem of material production, but also prescribes a comprehensive solution for the problems facing human society so that individuals may be totally liberated materially and spiritually in order to attain their happiness. Other examples. If we assume that the wealth of a society is 10 units and its inhabitants are 10 persons, then the share of each member is 1/10 of the total 1 unit per person. If some members of this society get more than 1 unit each, then a certain number from the society get nothing. Their share of the wealth of their society has been acquired by others. Hence, the presence of rich and poor in an exploitative society. Let us also suppose that 5 members of that particular society each own 2 units. In such a case, half of the society is deprived of their rights to the wealth of their society, for what should be theirs has been acquired by others. If an individual of that society needs only one of the units of the wealth of the society to satisfy his needs, then those who possess more than 1 unit are, in fact, seizing the rights of other members of the society. Because the 1 unit is all that is required to satisfy the needs of an individual, the additional units are acquired for the purpose of savings. This can only be achieved at the expense of the needs of others, the acquisition of others' share in this wealth. This is the reason behind the existence of those who hoard and do not spend, those who save beyond the satisfaction of their needs, and the existence of those who beg and are deprived of their right to the wealth of the society and do not find enough to consume. Such is an act of plunder and theft, yet according to the unjust and exploitative rules governing such a society, it is legitimate and overt. Any surplus beyond the satisfaction of needs should ultimately belong to all members of society. Individuals, however, have a right to effect savings from the share allotted to their own needs, since it is the amassing of wealth beyond the satisfaction of one's needs that is an encroachment upon public wealth. The industrious and skillful in a society have no right, as a result of this advantage, to take from the shares of others. They can use their talents to satisfy their own needs and save from those needs. Like any other member of the society, the aged and the mentally and the physically disabled should have their fair share of the wealth of society. The wealth of a society may be likened to a supply establishment or a store providing a certain number of people with daily rations satisfying their needs. Each person has a right to save from such provisions what he wants, i.e. to consume or save whatever portions of his share he decides, utilizing his talents and skills for such purposes. However, those who use their talents to acquire excessively from the supply establishment are undoubtedly thieves. Therefore, those using their skill to acquire wealth exceeding the satisfaction of their needs are in fact infringing upon the public right, namely the wealth of society, which is like the store in the said example. Disparity in the wealth of individuals in the new socialist society is not tolerated, save for those rendering certain services to the society for which they are accorded an amount congruent with their services. Individual shares only differ relative to the amount of production or public service rendered in excess. Hence, human experiences through history have produced a new experiment in a unique attempt to culminate the struggle of persons to complete their freedom, to achieve happiness through satisfying their needs, to ward off exploitation by others, to put an end to tyranny, and to find a method to distribute the wealth of the society equitably, without exploiting others or compromising their needs. It is the theory of the fulfillment of needs for the emancipation of humanity. The new socialist society is but a dialectical outcome of the unjust relationships prevailing in the world today. The new socialist society will introduce the natural solution, privately owned property to satisfy one's needs without exploitation, and collective property in which the producers are partners replacing private enterprise, which is based on the production of others without recognizing their right to a just share of the product. Whoever possesses the house in which you dwell, the vehicle in which you ride, or the income on which you live, possesses your freedom, or part of it. Freedom is indivisible. For people to be happy, they must be free. And to be free, they must possess the possibility of satisfying their own needs in the power process. Whoever possesses the means of fulfilling your needs controls or exploits you, and may enslave you despite any legislation to the contrary. The material needs of people that are basic and personal start with food, housing, clothing, and transport, and must be regarded as private and sacred, and their satisfaction should not depend on hire. To To satisfy these material needs through rent gives the original owner the right to interfere in your personal life and to control your imperative needs, even if the original owner be the society in general. The original owner can usurp your freedom and take away your happiness. The interference of the original owner may include repossessing your clothes, even leaving you naked on the street. Likewise, the owner of your means of transportation may leave you stranded on the sidewalk, and the owner of your house may make you homeless. People's imperative needs cannot be regulated by legal or administrative procedures. They must be fundamentally implanted into the society in accordance with natural rules. The aim of the socialist society is the happiness of the human being, which cannot be attained except by the establishment of one's material and spiritual freedom. The achievement of freedom depends on the private and sacred attainment of man's needs. One's needs should not be under the domination of others and should not be subject to the plunder by any source in society. Otherwise, one will live in insecurity. Deprivation of the means of fulfillment compromises freedom because, in attempting to satisfy basic needs, one would be subject to the interference of outside forces in one's basic interests. The transformation of existing societies of wage earners into those of partners is inevitable as a dialectical outcome of the contradictory economic theories prevailing in the world today. It is also a dialectical outcome of the unjust relationship based on the wage system. None of these issues have been resolved to date. The antagonistic force of the trade unions in the capitalist world is capable of replacing capitalist society's wages by a society of partnerships. The possibility of a socialist revolution starts by producers taking over their share of the production. Consequently, the aims of the producers' strikes will change from demanding increases in wages to controlling their share in production. Guided by the Green Book, this will sooner or later take place. The final step is for the new socialist society to reach a stage in which profit and money disappear. Society will become fully productive. The material needs of society will be met. In this final stage, profit will disappear, as will the need for money. The recognition of profit is an acknowledgement of exploitation, for profit has no limit. Attempts so far to limit profit by various means have been reformative, not radical, intending to prohibit exploitation of man by man. The final solution lies in eradicating profit, but because profit is the dynamic force behind the economic process, eliminating profit is not a matter of decree, but rather an outcome of the evolving socialist process. This solution can be attained when the material satisfaction of the needs of society and its members is achieved. Work to increase profit will itself lead to its own eradication. Domestic servants. Domestic servants, paid or unpaid, are a type of slave.
Oh, hello there. If you're watching this part of the video, it means you've been temporarily sent off your normal temporospatial trajectory. Peoples of Earth, there are many people who have spoken about ways to start making the things better for all the people on the planet. There were many people who spoke of this. Hitherto, we've been unable to heed the many messages. So the UFO Party is here for your reading and listening pleasure. If you have any revolutionary thinkers who you would like to have heard, the UFO will consider it. The book list is out of our control. That would be managed by our ostensible Lord and Savior, the person who lives in the place of understanding, of cosmic understanding. So maybe they're some type of human being, or maybe they're some type of God. Who knows?
And I hope that this meeting will be among them.
I'll live hopeful that there's the opportunity to improve human beings, such that we can become the aliens that we're so darn curious. Do they exist? Do they exist? And if anybody should have all the answers to that question, and not just America, it's the UN. Darn it, the UN. But this wouldn't be the first time that the UN hasn't listened to a good idea in the name of the African Union. I would like to greet the members of the General Assembly of the United Nations. And I hope that this meeting will be among the most historic in the history of the world. In the name of the General Assembly, at its 64th session, presided over by Libya, of the African Union of 1,000 traditional African kingdoms, and in my own name, I would like to take this opportunity as President of the African Union to congratulate our son, Obama, because he is attending the General Assembly, and we welcome him as his country is hosting this meeting. This session is taking place in the midst of so many challenges facing us. And the whole world should come together and unite its efforts to defeat the challenges that are our principal common enemy, those of climate change and international crises, such as the capitalist economic decline, the food and water crises, desertification, terrorism, immigration, piracy, man-made and natural epidemics, and nuclear proliferation. Perhaps influenza H1N1 was a virus created in a laboratory that got out of control, originally being meant as a military weapon. Such challenges also include hypocrisy, poverty, fear, materialism, and immorality. As is known, the United Nations was founded by 3 or 4 countries against Germany at the time. The United Nations was formed by the nations that joined together against Germany in the Second World War. Those countries formed a body called the Security Council, made its own countries permanent members, and granted them the power of veto. We were not present at that time. The United Nations was shaped in line with those 3 countries and wanted us to step into shoes originally designed against Germany. That is the real substance of the United Nations when it was founded over 60 years ago. That happened in the absence of some 165 countries. At a ratio of 1 to 8, that is, 1 was present and 8 were absent. They created the Charter, of which I have a copy. If one reads the Charter of the United Nations, one finds that the preamble of the Charter differs from its articles. How did it come into existence? All those who attended the San Francisco Conference in 1945 participated in creating the preamble, but they left the articles and internal rules of procedures of the so-called Security Council to experts, specialists, and interested countries, which were those countries that had established the Security Council and had united against Germany. The preamble is very appealing and no one objects to it, but all the provisions that follow it completely contradict the preamble. We reject such provisions and we will never uphold them. They ended with the Second World War. The preamble says that all nations, small or large, are equal. Are we equal when it comes to the permanent seats? No, we are not equal. The preamble states in writing that all nations are equal whether they are small or large. Do we have the right of veto? Are we equal? The preamble says that we have equal rights whether we are large or small. That is what is stated and what we agreed in the preamble. So the veto contradicts the Charter. The permanent seats contradict the Charter. We neither accept nor recognize the veto. The preamble of the Charter states that armed force shall not be used, save in the common interest. That is the preamble that we agreed to and signed, and we joined the United Nations because we wanted the Charter to reflect that. It says that armed force shall only be used in the common interest of all nations, but what has happened since then? 65 wars have broken out since the establishment of the United Nations and the Security Council. 65 since their creation, with millions more victims than in the Second World War. Are those wars and the aggression and force that were used in those 65 wars in the common interest of us all? No, they were in the interest of one or three or four countries, but not of all nations. We will talk about whether those wars were in the interest of one country or of all nations. That flagrantly contradicts the Charter of the United Nations that we signed. And unless we act in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations to which we agreed, we will reject it and not be afraid not to speak diplomatically to anyone. Now we are talking about the future of the United Nations. There should be no hypocrisy or diplomacy because it concerns the important and vital issue of the future of the world. It was hypocrisy that brought about the 65 wars since the establishment of the United Nations. The preamble also states that if armed force is used, it must be a United Nations force. Thus, military intervention by the United Nations with the joint agreement of the United Nations, not one or two or three countries using armed force. The entire United Nations will decide to go to war to maintain international peace and security. Since the establishment of the United Nations in 1945, if there is an act of aggression by one country against another, the entire United Nations should deter and stop the act. If a country, Libya, for example, were to exhibit aggression against France, then the entire organization would respond because France is a sovereign state member of the United Nations and we all share the collective responsibility to protect the sovereignty of all nations. However, 65 aggressive wars have taken place without any United Nations action to prevent them. 8 other massive, fierce wars whose victims number some 2 million have been waged by member states that enjoy veto powers. Those countries that would have us believe they seek to maintain the sovereignty and independence of peoples actually use aggressive force against peoples. While we would like to believe that these countries want to work for peace and security in the world and protect peoples, they have instead resorted to aggressive wars and hostile behavior, enjoying the veto they granted themselves as permanent members of the Security Council. They have initiated wars that have claimed millions of victims. The principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states is enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. No country, therefore, has the right to interfere in the affairs of any government, be it democratic or dictatorial, socialist or capitalist, reactionary or progressive. This is the responsibility of each society. It is an internal matter for the people of the country concerned. The senators of Rome once appointed their leader, Julius Caesar, as dictator because it was good for Rome at the time. No one can say of Rome at that time that it gave Caesar the veto. The veto is not mentioned in the charter. We joined the United Nations because we thought we were equals, only to find that one country can object to all the decisions we make. Who gave the permanent member their status in the Security Council? 4 of them granted this status to themselves. The only country that we in this assembly elected to permanent member status in the Security Council is China. This was done democratically, but the other seats were imposed upon us undemocratically through a dictatorial procedure carried out against our will, and we should not accept it. The Security Council reform we need is not an increase in the number of members, which would only make things worse. To use a common expression, if you add more water, you get more mud. It would add insult to injury. It would make things simply worse by adding more large countries to those that already enjoy membership of the Council. It would merely perpetuate the proliferation of superpowers. We therefore reject the addition of any more permanent seats. The solution is not to have more permanent seats, which would be very, very dangerous. Adding more superpowers would crush the peoples of small, vulnerable, and third world countries, which are coming together in what has been called the, it's my idea, so let me know what you think, the Group of 100, that's right, 100 small countries banding together in a forum that one member has called, or I called, the Forum of Small States. Do you like it? These countries would be crushed by superpowers were additional large countries to be granted membership in the Security Council. This door must be closed. We reject it strongly and categorically. Adding more seats to the Security Council would increase poverty, injustice, and tension at the world level, as well as great competition between certain countries, such as Italy, Germany, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, the Philippines, Japan, Brazil, Nigeria, Argentina, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, South Africa, Tanzania, Turkey, Iran, Greece, and Ukraine. All these countries would seek a seat on the Security Council, making its membership almost as large as that of the General Assembly, and resulting in an impractical competition. What solution can there be? The solution is for the General Assembly to adopt a binding resolution under the leadership of Mr. Trebeki, based on the majority will of Assembly members and taking into account the considerations of no other body. The solution is to close Security Council membership to the admission of further states. This item is on the agenda of the General Assembly during the present session, presided over by Alex Tracke. Membership through unions and the transference of mandates should supersede other proposals. We should focus on the achievement of democracy based on the equality of member states. There should be equality among member states, and the powers and mandates of the Security Council should be transferred to the General Assembly. Membership should be for unions, not for states. Increasing the number of state members would give the right to all countries to a seat, in accordance with the spirit of the preamble of the Charter. No country could deny a seat in the Council to Italy, for instance, if a seat were given to Germany. For the sake of argument, Italy might say that Germany was an aggressive country and was defeated in the Second World War. If we gave India a seat, Pakistan would say that it too is a nuclear country and deserves a seat, and that those two countries are at war. This would be a dangerous situation. If we gave a seat to Japan, then we should have to give one to Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world. Then Turkey, Iran, and Ukraine would make the same claim. What could we say to Argentina or Brazil? Libya deserves a seat for its efforts in the service of world security by discarding its weapons of mass destruction. All of them. Not one left. I prove it. Then South Africa, Tanzania, and Ukraine would demand the same. All of these countries are important. The door to Security Council membership should be closed. This approach is a falsehood, a trick that has been exposed. If we want to reform the United Nations, bringing in more superpowers is not the way. The solution is to foster democracy at the level of the General Congress of the world, the General Assembly, to which the powers of the Security Council should be transferred. The Security Council would become merely an instrument for implementing the decisions taken by the General Assembly, which would be the Parliament, the legislative assembly of the world.
This assembly is
Of
our
the
democratic
world.
forum, and the Security Council should be
This
responsible.
assembly is our democratic forum, and the Security Council should be responsible before it. We should not accept the current situation. These are the legislators of the members of the United Nations, and their resolutions should be binding. It is said that the General Assembly should do whatever the Security Council recommends. On the contrary, the Security Council should do whatever the General Assembly decides. This is the United Nations, the assembly that includes 192 countries. It is not the Security Council, which includes only 15 of the member states. How can we be happy about global peace and security if the whole world is controlled by only 5 countries?
Nobody implements our decisions.
We are 192 nations and countries, and we are like speakers' corners in London's Hyde Park.
Speaker's Corner.
We just speak, and nobody implements our decisions. We are mere decoration without any real substance.
Speaker's Corner, Speaker's Corner.
We are speakers' corners, no more, no less. We just make speeches and then disappear. This is who you are right now. Once the Security Council becomes only an executive body for resolutions adopted by the General Assembly, there will be no competition for membership of the Council. Once the Security Council becomes a tool to implement General Assembly resolutions, there will be no need for any competition. The Security Council should, quite simply, represent all nations. In accordance with the proposal submitted to the General Assembly, there would be permanent seats on the Security Council for all unions and groups of countries. The 27 countries of the European Union should have a permanent seat on the Security Council. The countries of the African Union should have a permanent seat on the Security Council. The Latin American and ASEAN countries should have permanent seats. The Russian Federation and the United States of America are already permanent members of the Security Council. The Southern African Development Community, SADC, once it is fully established, did you like my acronym, SADC? Should have a permanent seat. The 22 countries of the Arab League should have a permanent seat. The 57 countries of the Islamic Conference should have a permanent seat. The 118 countries of the non-aligned movement should have a permanent seat. Then there is the G100. Perhaps the small countries should also have a permanent seat. Countries not included in the unions that I have mentioned could perhaps be assigned a permanent seat too. Everyone look under your chair. There's a permanent seat for you.
Occupied by them in rotation every 6 or 12 months.
Every 6 or 12 months, we'll just play musical chairs. I am thinking of countries like Japan and Australia that are outside such organizations as ASEAN, or like the Russian Federation that is not a member of the European Union or Latin American or African unions. This would be a solution for them if the General Assembly votes in favor of it.
Votes in favor of it.
The issue is a vitally important one, as has already been mentioned. The General Assembly is the Congress and Parliament of the world. It's the leader of the world. We are the nations, and anyone outside this General Assembly will not be recognized. The President of the Assembly, Mr. Ali Abdusalam Treki, and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will produce the legal draft and set up the necessary committees to submit this proposal to a vote. that from now on, the Security Council will be made up of unions of nations. In this way, we will have justice and democracy, and we will no longer have a Security Council consisting of countries which have been chosen because they have nuclear weapons, large economies, or advanced technology. That is terrorism. We cannot allow the Security Council to be run by superpowers. That is terrorism in and of itself. If we want a world that is united, safe, and peaceful, this is what we should do. If we want to remain in a world at war, that is up to you. We will continue to have conflict and to fight until doomsday or the end of the world. All Security Council members should have the right to exercise the veto, or else we should eliminate the whole concept of the veto with this new formation of the Council. This would be a real Security Council. According to the new proposals submitted to the General Assembly, it will be an executive council under the control of the General Assembly, which will have the real power and make all the rules. In this way, all countries will be on an equal footing in the Security Council, just as they are in the General Assembly. In the General Assembly, we are all treated equally when it comes to membership and voting. It should be the same in the Security Council. Currently, one country has a veto. Another country does not have a veto. One country has a permanent seat. Another country does not have a permanent seat. We should not accept this game of musical chairs, nor should we accept any resolution adopted by the Security Council in its current composition. We were under trusteeship, we were colonized, and now we are independent. We are here today to decide the future of the world in a democratic way that will maintain the peace and security of all nations, large and small as equals. Otherwise it is terrorism, for terrorism is not just al-Qaeda, but can also take other forms. We should be guided by the majority of the votes in the General Assembly alone. If the General Assembly takes a decision by voting, then its wishes should be obeyed and its decision should be enforced. No one is above the General Assembly. Anyone who says he is above the Assembly should leave the United Nations and be on his own. Democracy is not for the rich, or the most powerful, or for those who practice terrorism. All nations should be and should be seen to be on an equal footing. At present, the Security Council is security feudalism, political feudalism for those with permanent seats, protected by them and used against us. It should be called not the Security Council, but the, this is a good one, Terror Council. In our political life, if they need to use the Security Council against us, they turn to the Security Council. If they have no need to use it against us, they ignore the Security Council. If they have an interest to promote an axe to grind, they respect and glorify the Charter of the United Nations. They turn to Chapter 7 of the Charter and use it against poor nations. If, however, they wish to violate the Charter, they would ignore it as if it did not exist at all. If the veto of the permanent members of the Security Council is given to those who have the power, this is injustice and terrorism and should not be tolerated by any of us. We should not live in the shadow of this injustice and terror. Superpowers have complicated global interests, and they use the veto to protect those interests. For example, in the Security Council, they use the power of the United Nations to protect their interests and to terrorize and intimidate the Third World, causing it to live under the shadow of terror. From the beginning, Since it was established in 1945, the Security Council has failed to provide security. On the contrary, it has provided terror and sanctions. It is only used against us. For this reason, we will no longer be committed to implementing Security Council resolutions. After this speech.
What? Oh, you're going to start now? That's right. Right now.
Which marks the 40th anniversary. 65 wars have broken out, either fighting among small countries or wars of aggression waged against us by the superpowers. The Security Council, in clear violation of the Charter of the United Nations, failed to take action to stop these wars or acts of aggression against all small nations and peoples. The General Assembly will vote on a number of historic proposals. Either we act as one, or we will fragment. If each nation were to have its own version of the General Assembly, the Security Council, and the various instruments, and each were to have an equal footing, the powers that currently fill the permanent seats would be confined to use of their own sovereign bodies, whether there be 3 or 4 of them, and would have to exercise their rights against themselves. This is of no concern to us. If they want to keep their permanent seats,
We shall never submit to their control or to their
that's fine.
veto that was given to them.
Permanent seats will no longer be of concern to us. We shall never submit to their control or to their exercise of the veto that was given to them by themselves. We are not so foolish as to give the right of veto to the superpowers to use so they can treat us as second-class fucking citizens and as outcast nations. It is not we who decided that those countries are the superpowers and respected nations with the power to act on behalf of 192 countries. You should be fully aware that we are ignoring the Security Council resolutions because those resolutions are used solely against us and not against the superpowers, which have the permanent seats and the right of veto. These powers never use any resolutions against themselves. They are, however, used against us. Such use has turned the United Nations into a travesty of itself and has generated wars and violations of the sovereignty of independent states. It has led to war crimes and genocides. All of this is in violation of the Charter of the United Nations, since no one pays attention to the Security Council of the United Nations. Each country and community has established its own Security Council, and the Security Council here has become isolated. The African Union has already established its own Peace and Security Council. The European Union has already established a Security Council. And Asian countries have already established their own Security Council. Soon, Latin America will have its own Security Council, as will the 120 non-aligned nations. Remember, the Group of 100. This means that we have already lost confidence in the United Nations Security Council, which has not provided us with security. And that is why we are now creating new regional security councils. We are not committed to obeying the rules or the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council in its present form, because it is undemocratic, dictatorial, and unjust. No one can force us to join the Security Council or to obey or comply with resolutions or orders given by the Security Council in its present composition. Furthermore, say it like it is. Furthermore, there is no respect for the United Nations and no regard for the General Assembly, which is actually the true United Nations, but whose resolutions are non-binding. The decisions of the International Court of Justice, the international justice body, take aim only at small countries and third world nations. Powerful countries escape the notice of the court, or if judicial decisions are taken against these powerful countries, they're not enforced. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, is an important agency within the United Nations. Powerful countries, however, are not accountable to it or under its jurisdiction. We have discovered that IAEA is used only against us. We are told that it is an international organization, but if that is the case, then all of the countries of the world should be under its jurisdiction. If it is not truly international, then right after this speech, we should no longer accept it and should close it down. Mr. Trekkie, in his capacity as President of the General Assembly, should talk to the Director General of the IAEA, Mr. al-Baradei, and should ask him if he is prepared to verify nuclear energy storage in all countries and inspect all suspected increases. If he says yes, then we accept the agency's jurisdiction. But if he says that he cannot go into certain countries that have nuclear power and that he does not have any jurisdiction over them, then we should close the agency down and not submit to its jurisdiction. For your information, I called Mr. al-Baradei when we had the problem of the Libyan nuclear bomb. You remember that problem? It was a problem. I called Mr. al-Baradei and asked him if the agreements by the superpowers to reduce nuclear supplies were subject to agency control and under inspection, and whether he was aware of any increases in their activity. He told me that he was not in a position to ask the superpowers to be inspected. So, is the agency only inspecting us? If so, it does not qualify as an international organization since it is selective, just like the Security Council and the International Court of Justice. This is not equitable, nor is it the United Nations. We totally reject this situation. Regarding Africa, Mr. President, whether the United Nations is reformed or not, and even before a vote is taken on any proposals of a historic nature, Africa should be given a permanent seat on the Security Council. Now, having already waited for too long, leaving aside United Nations reform, we can certainly say that Africa was colonized, isolated, and persecuted, and its rights usurped. Its people were enslaved and treated like animals, and its territory was colonized and placed under trusteeship. The countries of the African Union deserve a permanent seat. This is a debt from the past and has to be paid and has nothing to do with United Nations reform. Aboriginal to yo, it is a priority matter and is high on the agenda of the General Assembly. No one can say that the African Union does not deserve a permanent seat. Who can argue with this proposal? I challenge anyone to make a case against it. Where is the proof that the African Union or the African continent does not deserve a permanent seat? No one can possibly deny this. Another matter that should be voted on in the General Assembly is that of compensation for countries that were colonized, so as to prevent the colonization of a continent, the usurpation of its rights, and the pillaging of its wealth from happening again.
Why are Africans going
to Europe? Why are Asians going to Europe? Why are Latin Americans going to Europe? It is because Europe colonized those peoples and stole the material and human resources of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, the oil, minerals, uranium, gold, and diamonds, the fruit, vegetables, and livestock, and the people, and used them.
Now, new generations of Asians, Latin Americans, and Africans are seeking to reclaim that stolen wealth.
New generations of Asians, Latin Americans, and Africans are seeking to reclaim that stolen wealth as they have the right to do. At the Libyan border, I recently stopped 1,000 African migrants headed for Europe. I asked them why they were going there.
They told me it was to take
They
back their
told
stolen
me
wealth,
it was to take back
but
their
they would not be
stolen
leaving
wealth,
otherwise.
that they would not be
The
leaving
wealth that was taken from
otherwise.
us. If you decide to restore all this wealth, there will be
Who
no
can
more
restore the wealth
immigration
that
from
was
the
taken from
Philippines.
us? If you decide to restore all the wealth, there will be no more immigration from the Philippines, Latin America, Mauritius, and India. Let us have the wealth that was stolen from us.
Africa deserves
$777
$77 trillion.
trillion in compensation from the countries that colonized it. Africans will demand that amount, and if you do not give it to them, they will go to where you have taken those trillions of dollars. They have the right to do so. 777, not 600. They have to follow that money and to bring it back. Why is there no Libyan immigration to Italy, even though Libya is so close by? Italy owed compensation to the Libyan people. It accepted that fact and signed an agreement with Libya, which was adopted by both the Italian and Libyan parliaments. Italy admitted that its colonization of Libya was wrong and should never be repeated, and it promised not to attack the Libyan people by land, air, or sea. Italy also agreed to provide Libya with $250 million a year in compensation over the next 20 years and to build a hospital for Libyans maimed as a result of the mines planted in Libyan territory during the Second World War.
As a result of the mines planted in Libyan territory during the Second World War.
Italy apologized and promised that it would never again occupy the territory of another country. Italy, which was a kingdom during the fascist regime and has made rich contributions to civilization, should be commended for this achievement. Together with Prime Minister Berlusconi and his predecessor, who made their own contributions in that regard. Why is the Third World demanding compensation? So that there will be no more colonization, so that large and powerful countries will not colonize, knowing that they will have to pay compensation. Colonization should be punished. The countries that harmed other peoples during the colonial era should pay compensation for the damage and suffering inflicted under their colonial rule. There is another point that I would like to make. However, before doing so, and addressing a somewhat more sensitive issue, I should like to make an aside. We Africans are happy and proud indeed that a son of Africa is now President of the United States of America. That is a historic event. Now, in a country where blacks could not mingle with whites in cafes or restaurants or sit next to them on a bus, the American people have elected their president, a young black man, Mr. Obama of Kenyan heritage. That is a wonderful thing. And we are proud. It marks the beginning of a change. However, as far as I am concerned, Obama is a temporary relief for the next 4 or 8 years. I am afraid that we may then go back to square. No one can guarantee how America will be governed after Obama. We would be content if Obama could remain president of the United States of America forever. The statement that he just made shows that he is completely different from any American president that we have seen. American presidents used to threaten us with all manner of weapons, saying that they would send us Desert Storm, Grapes of Wrath, Rolling Thunder, and poisonous roses for Libyan children. That was their approach. American presidents used to threaten us with operations such as Rolling Thunder, sent to Vietnam, Desert Storm, sent to Iraq, Musketeer, sent to Egypt in 1956, even though America opposed it, and the poisonous roses visited upon Libyan children by Reagan. Can you imagine? One would have thought that presidents of a large country with a permanent seat on the Security Council and the right of veto would have protected us and sent us peace. And what did we get instead? Laser-guided bomb carried to us on F-111 aircraft. This was their approach. We will lead the world whether you like it or not, and will punish anyone who opposes us. What our son Obama said today is completely different. He made a serious appeal for nuclear disarmament, which we applaud. He also said that America alone could not solve the problems facing us, and that the entire world should come together to do so. He said that we must do more than we are doing now, which is making speeches. We agree with that and applaud it. He said that we had come to the United Nations to talk against one another. It is true that when we come here, we should communicate with one another on an equal footing. And he said that democracy should not be imposed from outside. Until recently, American presidents have said that democracy should be imposed from the outside on Iraq and other countries. He said that this was an internal affair. He spoke truly when he said that democracy cannot be imposed from outside. So we have to be cautious. Before I make these sensitive remarks, which, in case you forgot, sensitive remarks, I note that the whole world has so many polarities. Listen, should we have a world of so many polarities? Can we not have nations on an equal footing? Let us have an answer. Does anyone have an answer as to whether it is better to have a world of so many polarities? Why can we not have equal standing? Should we have patriarchs? Should we have popes? Should we have gods? Why should we have a world of so many polarities? We reject such a world and call for a world where big and small are equal. The other sensitive point is the headquarters of the United Nations. Can I have, excuse me, can I have your attention, please? All of you came across the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, crossing the Asian continent or the African continent to reach this place.
Is this Jerusalem?
Why? Is this Jerusalem? Is this the Vatican? Is this Mecca? All of you are tired, have jet lag, have sleepless nights. You're very tired, you're very low physically, you've been stuck inside your houses wearing masks. Somebody just arrived now, flying 20 hours. Then we want them to make a speech and talk about this? All of you are asleep, all of you are very tired. It is clear that all of you are lacking energy because of having to make a long journey. Why do we do that? Some of our countries are in nighttime and people are asleep. Now you should be asleep because your biological clock, your biological mind is accustomed to being asleep at this time. I wake up at 4 o'clock New York time before dawn because in Libya it is 11 in the morning. When I wake up at 11 o'clock it is supposed to be daytime. At 4 o'clock I am awake. Why?
Why? Think about it.
Think about it. If this was decided in 1945, should we still retain it? Why? Why can we not think about a place that is in the middle, that is comfortable? Another important point is that America, the host country, bears the expenses and looks after the headquarters and diplomatic missions and looks after the peace and security of the heads of state who come here. They are very strict. They spend a lot of money, New York and all of America being very tight. I want to relieve America of this hardship. We should thank America. We say to America, thank you for all the trouble that you have taken on yourself. We say thank you to America. We want to help reassure America and New York and keep them calm. They should not have the responsibility of looking after security. Perhaps someday a terrorist could cause an explosion or bomb a president. This place is targeted by al-Qaeda, this very building. Why was it not hit on September 11th? It was beyond their power. The next target would be this place. I am not saying this in an offhand manner.
The next target would be this place.
We have tens of thousands.
I'm not saying this in an offhand manner.
We have tens of members of al-Qaeda detained in Libyan prisons. This is the difference. Their confessions are very scary. That makes America live under tension. One never knows what will happen. Perhaps America or this place will be targeted again by a rocket. Perhaps tens of heads of state will die. We want to relieve America from this worry. We shall take the place to where it is not targeted. Now, after 50 years, the United Nations headquarters should be taken to another part of the hemisphere. After 50 years in the Western Hemisphere, for the next 50 years, it should be in the Eastern Hemisphere, or in the Middle Hemisphere, by rotation. Now, with 64 years, we have an extra 14 years over the 50 that headquarters should have been moved to somewhere else. This is not an insult to America. It is a service to America. We should thank America. This was possible in 1945, but we should not accept it now. Of course, this should be put to the vote in the General Assembly. Only in the Assembly, though, because in Section 23 of the Headquarters Agreement, it says that the United Nations headquarters can be moved to another location only by a resolution of the... Wait for it. Wait a little longer. General Assembly. If 51% of the Assembly approve relocation of headquarters, then it can be moved. America has the right to make security tight because it is targeted by terrorists and, by al-Qaeda. America has the right to take all security measures. We are not blaming America for that. However, we do not tolerate these measures. We do not have to come to New York and be subjected to all these measures. One president told me that he was told that his co-pilot should not come to America because there are restrictions. He asked how he could cross the Atlantic without a co-pilot. Why? He does not have to come here. Another president complained that his honor guard could not come because there was some misunderstanding regarding his name when it came to granting a visa. Another president said his own doctor could not get a visa and could not come to America. The security measures are very strict. If a country has any problem with America, they will set up restrictions on the movements of member delegations, as if one is in Guantanamo. As if one is in Guantanamo. Is this a member state of the United Nations, or is it a prisoner in the Guantanamo camp that cannot be allowed free movement? This is what is submitted to the General Assembly for a vote. Moving the headquarters. If 51% of you tired folk agree, then we come to the second vote, to the middle of the globe, or to the eastern part. If we say that we must move the headquarters to the middle of the hemisphere, why don't we move to Sirte or Vienna? One can come even without a visa. Once you come as a president, Libya is a secure country. We are not going to restrict you to 100 or 500 meters. Libya has no hostile actions against anybody. I think the same holds true of Vienna. If the vote says we should move the headquarters to the eastern part, then it will be Delhi or Beijing, the capital of China or the capital of India. That is logical, my brothers. I do not think there will be any objection to that. Then you will thank me for this proposal, for eliminating the suffering and the troubles of flying 14, 15, or 20 hours to come here. No one can blame America or say that America will reduce its contributions to the United Nations. No one should have that bad thought.
No one should have that bad a thought.
America, I am sure, is committed to its international obligations. It's gotta be, right? America will not be angry. It will thank you for alleviating its hardship, for taking on all that hardship and all the restrictions, even though this place is targeted by terrorists. We come now to the issues that will be considered by the General Assembly.
We come now to the issues that will be considered by the General Assembly.
We are about to put the United Nations on trial. The old organization will be finished and a new one will emerge. This is not a normal gathering. Do not adjust your United Nations. Even our son Obama said that this is not a normal gathering. It is an historic meeting. The wars that took place after the establishment of the United Nations, why did they occur? Where was the Security Council? Where was the Charter? Where was the United Nations?
was the United Nations.
There should be investigations and judicial intervention. Why have there been
Why have
massacres?
there been massacres?
We can start with
We
the
can start
Korean War because it took place after the establishment of the United
How did a
Nations.
war break out and cause millions of victims?
How did a war break out and cause millions of
Those
victims?
who are responsible for causing the war should be tried.
Nuclear weapons could have been used in that
Compensation
war.
and damages.
Those who are responsible for causing the war should be tried and should pay compensation and damages. To the Suez Canal War of
Then we come to the
1956,
Suez
that
Canal
file
War
should be
of
opened
1956.
wide. 3 countries with permanent seats on the
That
Security
file should be
Council
opened
and with right
wide.
of veto in the Council
3 countries
attacked a
with
member
permanent seats on the
state
Security
of this
Council
General
with
Assembly.
the right of veto in the Council.
A country that was a
attacked
sovereign state,
a member state of
Egypt,
this General Assembly.
was attacked.
A country that
Its
was a
army
sovereign
was
state, Egypt, was
destroyed.
attacked.
Thousands
Army
of
was destroyed.
Egyptians
Thousands
were
of
killed,
Egyptians
and
many
many Egyptian towns and entities were destroyed, all because Egypt wanted to nationalize the Suez Canal. How could such a thing have happened during the era of the United Nations and its charter? How is it possible to guarantee that such a thing will not be repeated unless we make amends for past wrongs? Those were dangerous events in the Suez Canal and Korean War files should be reopened. Next, we come to the Vietnam War. There were 3 million victims of that war. During 12 days, more bombs were dropped than during 4 years of the Second World War. It was a fierce war, and it took place after the establishment of the United Nations and after we had decided that there were to be no more wars. The future of humankind is at stake, my friends. We cannot stay silent. How can we feel safe? How can we be complacent? This is the future of the world, and we, who are in the General Assembly of the United Nations, must make sure that such wars are not repeated in the future. They're bad for the environment.
Then Panama was attacked.
Then Panama was
Even though it was
attacked,
an independent
even
member
though it
state
was
of
an
the General
independent member state of the
4,000
General
people
Assembly.
killed, and the president of that country
4,000
was taken
people were
prisoner
killed,
and
and
put
the
in prison.
president of that country was taken prisoner and put in prison. Noriega should be released.
Noriega
We should
be
open that
released.
file. How can we entitle a
We should
country
open
that
that
is a
file.
United Nations member
we
state
entitle
to
a country that
wage
is a
war
United
against
Nations
another
member state to
country
wage
and
war
capture
against
its
another country,
president,
capture its
treat him
president,
as a
treat him as a
criminal,
criminal,
and
put him
put
in
him
prison?
in prison?
Who would accept that?
Who would accept that? It could be repeated. We should not stay
It could be
quiet.
repeated. We should not stay
We should
quiet.
have an investigation. Any one of us, member states, could
have an
face the
investigation.
same situation,
Any one of us member states could
especially
face the
if
same
such
situation.
aggression is by a
Especially
member
if such
state
aggression
with
is
a
by a
permanent
member
seat on the
With a permanent
Security
seat on the
Council
Security
and with the
Council,
responsibility
responsibility
to maintain peace and security worldwide. Then there was the war in Grenada. That country
was the
was
war in Grenada.
invaded even though it was a
She
member
was
state.
invaded even though
It was
a member
attacked
state.
by 5,000 warships, 7,000
by
troops,
5,000
and
warships.
dozens of military aircraft. And it is
7,000 troops,
the smallest country in the world.
It's the smallest country
This
in the
occurred
world.
after the establishment of the
This occurred
United
after the
Nations
establishment
and
the
of
United
Security
Nations, the
Council
Security Council
and its veto.
And the president of Grenada,
And the
Mr.
president
Bishop,
of
was
Grenada,
assassinated.
Mr. Maurice
How could
Bishop,
that have happened
was
with
assassinated.
impunity?
How could that have
How can
happened
we
with
guarantee the
impunity?
United Nations is
It is a
good?
tragedy.
For
How
certain
can we
countries, it's
guarantee
good.
that the United Nations is good or not, that a certain country is good or not?
Can we trust the
How
United
can we be
Nations?
safe or happy about our future or not? Can we trust the Security Council or not? Can we trust the United Nations or not? We must look into and investigate the bombings of Somalia. Somalia is a United Nations member state. It is an independent country under the rule of Adid. We want an investigation. Why did that happen? Who allowed it to happen? Who gave the green light for that country to be attacked? Then there is the former Yugoslavia. No country was as peaceful as Yugoslavia, constructed step by step and piece by piece after being destroyed by Hitler.
We were doing the
We
same
destroyed
job as
it.
Hitler.
as if we were
Tito
doing
built that
the same
peaceful
job
country
as
step
Hitler.
by step,
Tito
brick by
built
brick,
that
and we
beautiful
arrived and
country
broke it
step
apart
by
for
step and brick
imperialistic
by brick, and
personal
then we
interests.
arrived and broke it apart for imperialistic
complacent
personal interests. How can we be complacent
Why can
about
we
that?
not be satisfied?
Why can we
Peaceful
not
country like
be
Yugoslavia
satisfied?
faced such a tragedy.
If a peaceful
The
country
General
like
Assembly should have
Yugoslavia
an
faced such a
investigation
tragedy, the
to decide
General
who should be
Assembly
tried before the
should
incident.
have an investigation and decide
We
who
have
should
war
be
in Iraq.
tried before the International Criminal Court. Then we have the war in Iraq. The motherfucker of all evils. The United Nations should also investigate that. The General Assembly,
Nations should
presided over
investigate
by
that.
Mr.
General
Trekkie,
Assembly,
should
presided over by
investigate
Mr.
that.
Trekkie, should
The
investigate
invasion
that.
of Iraq was a violation of the
invasion of Iraq
United
was a
Nations
violation of the
Charter.
United Nations
It was
Charter.
done without any
without
justification
any
by
justification
superpowers with
seats on the
permanent
Security Council.
seats on the Security Council.
Iraq is an
Iraq
independent
is an
country.
independent
General
country
Assembly.
and a member state
How
of
could
the
those countries
General
attack Iraq
Assembly.
as
How
provided for in the
could
Charter of
those
the United
countries
Nations?
attack
Should have
Iraq?
intervened
As provided for in the
and stopped
Charter,
the attack.
the United Nations should have intervened and stopped the attack. We spoke in the General Assembly and urged it to use the Charter to stop that attack. We were against the invasion of Kuwait. And the Arab countries fought Iraq alongside foreign countries in the name of the United Nations Charter. In the first instance, the Charter was respected. The second time, when we wanted to use the Charter to stop the war against Iraq, no one used it. And that document was ignored. Why did that occur? Mr. Trekkie and the General Assembly should investigate to determine whether there was any reason at all to invade Iraq, because the reasons for that attack remain mysterious and ambiguous, and we might face the same destiny. Why was Iraq invaded? The invasion itself was a serious violation of the United Nations Charter, and it was wrong. There was also a total massacre or genocide. More than 1.5 million Iraqis were killed. We want to bring the Iraqi file before the International Criminal Court, and we want those who committed mass murder against the Iraqi people to be tried. It is easy for Charles Taylor to be tried, or for Bashir to be tried, or for Noriega to be tried. That is an easy job, yes. But what about those who have committed mass murder against the Iraqis? They cannot be tried? They cannot go before the ICC?
But what about those
Yeah.
who have committed mass murder against
If the court is
Iraqis?
unable to accommodate us, then we should not accept
They
it.
cannot be tried.
Either it is meant for all of us, large or small, or we should not accept it and should reject it. Anyone who commits a war crime can be tried, but we are not livestock or animals like those that are slaughtered for the id. E-I-D. Eid? Eid? We have the right to live, and we are ready to fight and to defend ourselves. We have the right to live in dignity under the sun and on earth. They have already tested us, and we have withstood the test. There are other things as well. Why is it that Iraqi prisoners of war can be sentenced to death? When Iraq was invaded and the president of Iraq was taken, he was a prisoner of war. He should not have been tried. He should not have been hanged. When the war was over, he should have been released. We want to know why a prisoner of war should have been tried. Who sentenced the president of Iraq to death? Is there an answer to that question? We know the identity of the judge who tried him. As the who tied the noose around the president's neck on the day of sacrifice and hanged him. Those people wore masks. How could this have happened in a civilized world? There were prisoners of war of civilized countries under international law. How could government ministers and a head of state be sentenced to death and hanged? Were those who tried them lawyers or members of a judicial system? Do you know what people are saying? They are saying that the faces behind the masks were those of the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and that it was they who put the President of Iraq to death. Why did the executioners not unmask their faces? Why do we not know their ranks? Why do we not know whether they were officers, judges, soldiers, or doctors? How does it come about that the president of a state member of the United Nations was sentenced to death and killed? We do not know the identity of the executioners. The United Nations is duty-bound to answer these questions. Who carried out the death sentence? They must have legal status and official responsibilities. We should know their identities, and we should know about the presence of a physician and the nature of all the legal proceedings. That would be true for an ordinary citizen, let alone for the president of a state member of the United Nations who was put to death in that manner. My third point on the Iraq war relates to Abu Ghraib. This was a fucking disgrace to humankind. I know that the United States authorities will investigate this scandal, but the United Nations must not ignore it either. The General Assembly should investigate this matter. Prisoners of war held in Abu Ghraib, prisoners were torturers. Dogs were set on them. Men were raped. This is unprecedented in the history of war. It was sodomy. And it was an unprecedented sin, never before committed by past aggressors or invaders. Well, not never, but not since the United Nations created a charter. Prisoners of war are soldiers, but these were raped in prison by a state, a permanent member of the Security Council. This goes against civilization and humankind. We must not keep silent. We must know the facts.
We must not keep silent.
Even today, a quarter of a million Iraqi prisoners, men and women alike, remain in Abu Ghraib. They are being maltreated, persecuted, and raped. There must be an investigation.
Persecuted and raped. There must be an investigation.
Turning to the war in Afghanistan, this too must be investigated. Why are we against the Taliban? Why are we against Afghanistan? Who are the Taliban? If the Taliban want a religious state, that's fine. Think of the Vatican. Does the Vatican pose a threat to us? No. It is a religious, very peaceful state. If the Taliban wants to create an Islamic emirate, who says that this makes them an enemy? Is anyone claiming that bin Laden is of the Taliban or that he is Afghan? Is bin Laden of the Taliban? No. He is not of the Taliban, and he is not Afghan. Were the terrorists who hit New York City of the Taliban? Were they from Afghanistan? They were neither Taliban nor Afghan. Then what was the reason for the wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan? If I truly wanted to deceive my American and British friends, I would encourage them to send more troops, and I would encourage them to persist in this bloodbath. But they will never succeed in Iraq or Afghanistan. Look what happened to them in Iraq, which is a desert. It is even worse in mountainous Afghanistan. If I wanted to deceive them, I would tell them to continue the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but no.
I want
to save the citizens of the United States, the United Kingdom, and other countries who are fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan.
So I tell them, leave Afghanistan to the Afghans.
So I tell them,
leave Iraq to the Iraqis.
Leave Afghanistan to the Afghans. Leave Iraq to the Iraqis.
They are free to do so.
If they want to fight each other, they are free to do so. America had its civil war, and no one interfered in it. Well,
America had its
but that is minimal. There were civil wars in Spain, China, and countries all over the world. No place on earth has been free of civil wars. Let there be a civil war in Iraq. If the Iraqis want to have a civil war and fight each other, that is fine. Who says that if the Taliban form a government, they would possess intercontinental missiles or the kind of aeroplanes that hit New York. Did those aeroplanes take off from Afghanistan or Iraq? No. They took off from American airports. So why is Afghanistan being struck? The terrorists were not Afghans or Taliban or Iraqis. Why are we silent? We must never be war devils. Anyone who does not speak the truth is a silent devil. We are committed to international peace and security. We do not wish to scorn or ridicule humankind. We want to save humanity.
We are committed to international peace.
As President of the General Assembly, Mr. Ali Treki should open an investigation of the assassinations file. In addition to the war files, who killed Patrice Lumumba and why? We merely want to record it in the annals of African history. We want to know how an African leader, a liberator, came to be assassinated. Who killed him? We want our sons to be able to read the history of how Patrice Lumumba, the hero of Congo's liberation struggle, was assassinated. We want to know the facts. Even 50 years on. That is one file that should be reopened. And who killed Secretary General Hammarskjöld? Who fired on his aeroplane in 1961 and why? Then, sorry, being Jamaican. Then there is the assassination of the United States President Kennedy in 1963. We want to know who killed him and why. There was somebody called Lee Harvey Oswald who was then killed by one Jack Ruby. Why did he kill him? Jack Ruby, an Israeli, killed Lee Harvey Oswald, who killed Kennedy. Why did this Israeli kill Kennedy's killer? Then Jack Ruby, the killer of Kennedy,
died in mysterious circumstances before he could be tried.
Died in mysterious circumstances before he could be tried. Probably open those files. The whole world knows that Kennedy wanted to investigate the Israeli Dimona nuclear reactor. This involves international peace and security and weapons of mass destruction. That is why we should reopen this file. Then there is the assassination of Martin Luther King, the Black Reverend and human rights activist. BLM, sort of. No less than they used to. His assassination was a plot, and we should know why he was killed and who killed him. Then Khalil Wazir, or Abu Jihad, a Palestinian, was attacked. He was living peacefully in Tunisia, a member state, and that country's sovereignty is not respected. You cannot keep silent. Even though submarines and ships were detected along the coast of Tunisia, where he was killed, no one was accused or tried. Abu Iyad was also killed, and we should know how he was killed. He was killed in ambiguous circumstances. In Operation Spring of Youth, Kamal Nasir, a poet, Kamal Adwan, and Abu Yusuf al-Najjar, 3 Palestinians, were killed in Lebanon, a country that is a free sovereign state member of the General Assembly. They were attacked and killed while sleeping peacefully. We should know who killed them, and he should be tried so that those crimes against humanity aren't repeated. We have already talked about the size of this force used in the invasion of Grenada. 7,000 troops, 15 battleships, and dozens of bombers. And President Bishop was killed, even though Grenada was a member state. Those are crimes, and we cannot keep silent. Otherwise, we will look like sacrificial beasts. We are not animals. Year after year, we are attacked. We defend ourselves, our sons, and our children, and we are not afraid. We have the right to live, and the earth is not destined for violence, but for us all. We can never live on this earth in such humiliation. So those are the wars. The last file is that of the massacres. In the Sabra and Shatila massacre, 3,000 people were killed. That area under the protection of the occupying Israeli army was the site of a huge and calamitous massacre in which 3,000 Palestinian men, women, and children were killed. How can we keep quiet? Lebanon is a sovereign state. A member of the General Assembly was occupied. Sabra and Shatila were under Israeli control, and then the massacre took place. Then there was the 2008 massacre in Gaza. There were 1,000 women and 2,200 children among the victims killed in the massacre in Gaza in 2008. 60 United Nations facilities and another 30 belonging to non-governmental organizations were damaged. 50 clinics were destroyed. 40 doctors and nurses were killed while carrying out humanitarian activities. This took place in Gaza in December 2008.
The perpetrators are still alive.
The perpetrators are still alive, and they should be tried by the International Criminal Court. Should we try only the underdogs, the weak and the poor of third world countries, and not important and protected figures? Under international law, they should all face trial for the consequences of the crimes that they have committed. Otherwise, the role of the ICC will never be recognized. If the decisions of the ICC are not respected or implemented, if the General Assembly and the Security Council mean nothing, and if the International Atomic Energy Agency serves only certain countries and organizations, then what is the United Nations? It would mean that the United Nations is nothing and is insignificant. Where is it? There is no United Nations. Then, while piracy may be a phenomenon of the high seas, a form of terrorism, we talk about the piracy in Somalia. Somalis are not pirates. We are the pirates. We went there and usurped their economic zones, their fish, and their wealth. Libya, India, Japan, and America. Any country in the world, we are all pirates. We all entered the territorial waters and economic zone of Somalia and stole.
The
Somalis are protecting their own fish, their sustenance. They have become pirates because they are defending their children's food. Now, we seek to address that matter in the wrong way. Should we send warships to Somalia? We should send warships to the pirates who have attacked and seized the economic zones and wealth of the Somalis and the food of their children. I met the pirates, and I told them that I would negotiate an agreement between them and the international community that respects the 200-mile exclusive economic zone under the law of the sea, that protects all marine resources belonging to the Somali people, and that stops all countries from disposing of toxic waste along the Somali coast. In return, the Somalis would no longer attack ships. We will propose and draft such an international treaty, and will submit it to the General Assembly. That is the solution. The solution does not lie in sending more military ships to fight the Somalis. That is not the solution. We are addressing the phenomenon of piracy and terrorism in the wrong way. Today, there is swine flu. But tomorrow,
there is swine flu.
Perhaps tomorrow there will be fish flu or bat flu, because sometimes we produce viruses by controlling them. It is a commercial business. Capitalist companies produce viruses so that they can generate and sell vaccinations. This is Gaddafi's words, maybe not mine. That is very shameful and poor ethics. Vaccinations and medicine should not be sold. That is, I agree with that. In the green, in the green book, I maintain that medicines should not be sold or subject to commercialization. Medicine should be free of charge and vaccinations given to children. But capitalist companies produce the viruses and vaccinations and want to make a profit. Why are they not free of charge? We should give them free of charge and not sell them. The entire world should strive to protect our people create and manufacture vaccinations and give them free to children and women and not profit from them. All those items are on the agenda of the General Assembly, which has only to exercise that duty. The Ottawa Convention on Landmines forbids the production of landmines. That is wrong. Landmines are defensive weapons. If I place them along the border of my country and someone wants to invade me, they may be killed. That is all right because they are invading me. The convention should be reconsidered. I am not taking that defensive weapon to another country. The enemy is coming to me. On the al-Gaddafi website, I call for that treaty to be modified or annulled. This treaty should be modified or annulled. I want to use anti-personnel mines to defend my home against invasion. Eliminate weapons of mass destruction, not landmines, which are defensive weapons. With regard to the Palestinian situation, the two-state solution ain't possible. It is not practical. Currently, these two states completely overlap. Partition is doomed to failure. These two states are not neighbors. They are coextensive in terms of both population and geography. A buffer zone cannot be created between the two states because there are 500,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank and 1 million Arab Palestinians in the territory known as Israel. The solution is therefore a democratic state without religious fanaticism or ethnicity. The generation of Sharon and Arafat, that's over. We need a new generation in which everyone can live in peace. Look at Palestinian and Israeli youth. They both want peace and democracy, and they want to live under one state. This conflict, it poisons the world. The White Book actually has the solution. I hold it here. The solution is Israel. Arabs, I named that one. Arabs have no hostility or animosity towards Israel. We are cousins and of the same race, Israel, but will it work in Kafixi? We want to live in peace. The refugees should go back. You are the ones who brought the Holocaust upon the Jews. You, not we, are the ones who burned them. We gave them refuge. We gave them safe haven during the Roman era and the Arab reign in Andalusia and during the reign of Hitler. You are the ones who poisoned them. You are the ones who annihilated them. We provided them with protection. You expelled them. Let us see the truth. We are not hostile. We are not enemies of the Jews, and one day the Jews will need the Arabs. At that point, Arabs will be the ones to give them protection, to save them, as we have done in the past. Look at what everybody else did to the Jews. Hitler is an example. You are the ones who hate the Jews, not us. In brief, Kashmir should be an independent state, neither Indian nor Pakistani. We must end that conflict. Kashmir should be a buffer state between India and Pakistan. With regard to Darfur, I truly hope that the assistance provided by international organizations can be used for development projects, for agriculture, for industry, and for irrigation. You are the ones who made it a crisis. You put it on the altar. You wanted to sacrifice Darfur so that you could interfere in its internal affairs. You have turned the Hariri people into a United Nations problem. You are selling Hariri's corpse. You just want to settle scores with Syria. Lebanon is an independent state. It has laws, courts, a judiciary, and police. At this stage, it is no longer the perpetrators that are being sought. The real wish is to settle scores with Syria, not ensure justice for Hariri. The cases of Khalil al-Wazir, Lumumba, Kennedy, and Hammarskjöld should also have been turned over to the United Nations. If the Hariri case merits such attention, the General Assembly is now under the presidency of Libya. This is our right. Libya hopes that you will assist in making the transition from a world fraught with crises and tension to a world in which humanity peace and tolerance prevail. I will personally follow up on this issue with the General Assembly, President Trekkie, and the Secretary General. It is not our habit to compromise when it comes to the destiny of humanity and the struggles of the Third World and the 100 small nations, which should live in peace always.
Indeed, they are the slaves of the modern age. Since the new socialist society is based on partnership and not on a wage system, natural socialist rules do not apply to domestic servants because they render services rather than production. Services have no tangible material product and cannot be divided into shares according to the natural socialist rule. Domestic servants have no alternative but to work for wages, or even be unpaid in the worst of situations. As wage earners are a type of slave, and their slavery exists as long as they work for wages, domestic servants, whose position is lower than that of wage earners in economic establishments and corporations, have an even greater need to be emancipated from the society of wage labor and the society of slaves. Domestic servants is a phenomenon that comes next to slavery. The third universal theory heralds emancipation from the fetters of injustice, despotism, exploitation, and economic and political hegemony for the purposes of establishing a society of all the people where all are free and share equally in authority, wealth, and arms. Freedom will then triumph definitively and universally. The Green Book thus defines the path of liberation to masses of wage earners and domestic servants in order that human beings may achieve freedom. The struggle to liberate domestic servants from their status of slavery and to transform them into partners, where their material production can be divided into its necessary basic components, is an inevitable process. Households should be serviced by their habitants. Essential household services should not be performed by domestic servants, paid or unpaid, but by employees who can be promoted in rendering their services and can enjoy social and material benefits as any other public employee would. Part 3. The social basis of the third universal theory. The social factor, the national factor, is the dynamic factor of human history. The social bond which binds together human communities from the family to the tribe to the nation is the basis for the movement of history. Heroes in history are by definition those who have sacrificed for causes. But what causes? They sacrifice for the sake of others. But which others? They are those with whom they maintain a relationship. Therefore, the relationship between an individual and a group is a social one that governs the people's dealings amongst themselves. Nationalism, then, is the base upon which one nation emerges. Social causes are therefore national, and the national relationship is a social one. The social relationship is derived from society, i.e. the relationship among members or one nation. The social relationship is therefore a national relationship, and the national is a social relationship, even if small in number communities or groups form one nation, regardless of the individual relationship amongst its members. What is meant by community is that which is permanent because of the common national ties that govern it. Historic movements are mass movements, i.e. the movement of one group in its own interests differentiated from the interests of other communities. These differentiations indicate the social characteristics that bind a community together. Mass movements are independent movements to assert the identity of a group conquered or oppressed by another group. The struggle for authority happens within the group itself, down to the level of the family, as was explained in Part 1 of the Green Book. The political axis of the third universal theory. A group movement is a nation's movement for its own interests. By virtue of its national structure, each group has common social needs which must be collectively satisfied. These needs are in no way individualistic. They are collective needs, rights, demands, or objectives of a nation, which are linked by a single ethos. That is why these movements are called national movements. Contemporary national liberation movements are themselves social movements. They will not come to an end before every group is liberated from the domination of another group. The world is now passing through one of its regular cycles of the movement of history, namely, the social struggle in support of nationalism. In the world of man, there is as much a historical reality as it is a social reality. That means that the national struggle, the social struggle, is the basis of the movement of history. It is stronger than all the other factors since it is in the nature of the human group. It is in the nature of the nation. It is in the nature of life itself. Other animals apart from man live in groups. Indeed, just as the community is the basis for the survival of all the groups within the animal kingdom, so nationalism is the basis for the survival of nations. Nations whose nationalism is destroyed are subject to ruin. Minorities, which are one of the main political problems in the world, are the outcome. They are nations whose nationalism has been destroyed and which are thus torn apart. The social factor is therefore a factor of life, a factor of survival. It is the nation's innate momentum for survival. Nationalism in the human world and group instinct in the animal kingdom are like gravity in the domain of material and celestial bodies. If the sun lost its gravity, its gases would explode and its unity would no longer exist. Accordingly, unity is the basis for survival. The factor of unity in any group is a social factor. In man's case, nationalism. For this reason, human communities struggle for their own national unity, the basis for their survival. The national factor, the social bond, works automatically to impel a nation towards survival, in the same way that the gravity of an object works to keep it as one mass surrounding its center. The dissolution and dispersion of atoms in an atomic bomb are the result of the explosion of the nucleus, which is the focus of gravitation for the particles around it. When the factor of unity in those component systems is destroyed and gravity is lost, every atom is separately dispersed. This is the nature of matter. It is an established natural law. To disregard it or to go against it is damaging to life. Similarly, man's life is damaged when he begins to disregard nationalism, the social factor, for it is the gravity of the group, the secret of its survival. Only the religious factor is a rival to the social factor in influencing the unity of a group. The religious factor may divide the national group or unite groups with different nationalisms. However, the social factor will eventually triumph. This has been the case throughout the ages. Historically, each nation had a religion. This was harmonious. Eventually, however, differences arose which became a genuine cause of conflict and instability in the lives of people throughout the ages. A sound rule is that each nation should have a religion. For it to be otherwise is abnormal. Such an abnormality creates an unsound situation which becomes a real cause for disputes within one national group. There is no other solution but to be harmonious with the natural rule, i.e., each nation has a single religion. When the social factor is compatible with the religious factor, harmony prevails and the life of communities becomes stable, strong, and develops soundly. Marriage is a process that can positively or negatively influence the social factor, though on a natural basis of freedom, both man and woman are free to accept whom they want and reject whom they do not want. Marriage within a group, by its very nature, strengthens its unity and brings about collective growth in conformity with the social factor. Get hitched. Get hitched, have kids. As many as we can. More. To the individual, the family is more important than the state. Mankind acknowledges the individual as a human being, and the individual acknowledges the family, which is his cradle, his origin, and his social umbrella. According to the law of nature, the human race is the individual and the family, but not the state. The human race has neither relations nor anything else to do with the state, which is an artificial, political, economic, and sometimes military system. The family is like a plant with branches, stems, leaves, and blossoms. Cultivating nature into farms and gardens is an artificial process that has no relevance to the plant itself. The fact that certain political, economic, or military factors tie a number of families into one state does not necessarily link this system or its organization with humanity. Similarly, any situation, position, or proceeding that results in the dispersion, decline, or loss of the family is inhuman, unnatural, and oppressive, analogous to any procedure, measure, or action that destroys a plant and its branches and withers its leaves and blossoms. Societies in which the existence and unity of the family become threatened due to any circumstance are similar to fields whose plants experience uprooting, drought, fire, weathering, or death. The blossoming gardens or field is one whose plants grow, blossom, and pollinate naturally. The same holds true of human societies. The flourishing society is that in which the individual grows naturally within the family and the family within society. The individual is linked to the larger family of humankind like a leaf is to a branch or a branch to a tree. They have no value or life if they are separated. The same holds true for individuals if they are separated from their families. The individual without a family has no value or social life. If human society reaches the stage where the individual lives without a family, it would then become a society of tramps without roots, like artificial plants. The tribe. A tribe is a family which has grown as a result of procreation. It follows that a tribe is an enlarged family. Similarly, a nation is a tribe which has grown through procreation. The nation, then, is an enlarged tribe. The world is a nation which has been diversified into various nations. The world, then, is an enlarged nation. The relationship which binds the family also binds the tribe, the nation, and the world. However, it weakens with the increase in number. The essence of humanity is that of nation. The essence of nation is that of tribe. And the essence of the tribe is that of family. The degree of warmth involved in the relationship decreases proportionately with the increase in size of the social unit. This is an indisputable social fact, denied only by those who are ignorant of it. The social bond, cohesiveness, unity, intimacy, and love are stronger at the family level than at the tribal level, stronger at the tribal level than that of the nation, and stronger at the level of the nation than that of the world. Advantages, privileges, values, and ideals based on social bonds exist where those bonds are natural and undoubtedly strong. They are stronger at the family level than at the level of the tribe, stronger at the tribal level than that of the nation, and stronger at the nation's level than that of the world. Thus, these social bonds, benefits, advantages, and ideals associated with them are lost wherever the family, the tribe, the nation, or humankind vanish or are lost. It is therefore of great importance for human society to maintain the cohesiveness of the family, the tribe, the nation, and the world in order to benefit from we're on this fucking together, guys, from the advantages, privileges, values, and ideals yielded by the solidarity, cohesiveness, unity, intimacy, and love of family, tribe, nation, and humanity. In the social sense, the familial society is better than that of the tribe. The tribal society is better than that of the nation, and the society of the nation is better than world society with respect to fellowship, affection, solidarity, and benefits. The merits of the tribe. Since the tribe is a large family, it provides its members with much the same material benefits and social advantages that the family provides for its members, for the tribe is a secondary family. What must be emphasized is that in the context of the tribe, an individual might indulge himself in an uncouth manner, something which he would not do within the family. However, because of the smallness and size of the family, immediate supervision is not exercised, unlike the tribe, whose members continually feel that they are under its supervision. In view of these considerations, the tribe forms a behavior pattern for its members, developing into a social education, which is better and more noble than any school education. The tribe is a social school where its members are raised to absorb the high ideals which develop into a behavior pattern for life. These become automatically rooted as the human being grows, unlike classroom education, which its curricula formerly dictated and gradually lost with the growth of the individual. This is so because it is formal and compulsory, and because the individual is aware of the fact that it is dictated to him. The tribe is a natural social umbrella for social security. By virtue of social tribal traditions, the tribe provides for its members collective protection in the form of fines, revenge, and defense, namely social protection. Blood is the prime factor in the formation of the tribe, but it is not the only one, because affiliation is also a factor in the formation of the tribe. With the passage of time, the differences between the factors of blood and affiliation disappear, leaving the tribe as one social and physical unit, though it remains fundamentally a unit of blood in origin. The nation. The nation is the individual's national political umbrella. It is wider than the social umbrella provided by the tribe to its members. Tribalism damages nationalism because tribal allegiances weaken the national loyalty and flourishes at its expense. In the same way, loyalty to the family flourishes at the expense of tribal loyalty and weakens it. National loyalty is essential to the nation, but at the same time, it is a threat to humanity. The nation in the world community is similar to the family in the tribe. The more the families of a tribe feud and become fanatical, the more the tribe is threatened. The family is threatened when its individual members feud and pursue only their personal interests. Similarly, if the tribes of a nation quarrel and pursue only their own interests, then the nation is undermined. National fanaticism expressed in the use of force against weak nations or national progress, which is at the expense of other nations, is evil and harmful to humanity. However, strong individuals who have self-respect and are aware of their own individual responsibilities are important and useful to the family, just as a strong and respectable family, which is aware of its importance, is socially and materially beneficial to the tribe. Equally useful to the whole world is a progressive, productive, and civilized nation. The national political structure is damaged when it descends to a lower social level, namely to the family and tribe, and attempts to act in their manner and to adopt their views. The nation is an enlarged family which has passed through the period of the tribe and through the diversification of tribes that have branched out from one common source. It also includes those members who affiliated themselves with its destiny. The family likewise grows into a nation only after passing through the period of the tribe and its diversification, as well as through the process of affiliation which comes about as a result of interaction between various communities in a society. Inevitably, this is achieved over a long period of time. Although the passage of time creates new nations, it also helps to fragment all the old ones. Common origin and common destiny through affiliation are the two historic bases for any nation, though origin ranks first and affiliation second. A nation is not defined only by origin, even though origin is its basis and beginning. In addition to its origin, a nation is formed by human affiliations through the course of history, which induce a group of people to live in one area of land, develop a common history, form one heritage, and face the same destiny. A nation, irrespective of blood bond, is formed through a sense of belonging and a shared manifest destiny. But why has the map of the earth witnessed great nations that have disappeared to give way to the rise of other nations? Is the reason only political, without any relationship to the social aspect of the third universal theory? Or is it social and so properly the concern of this part of the Green Book? Let us see. The family is indisputably a social structure rather than a political one. The same applies to the tribe because it is a family which has reproduced and enlarged itself to become many families. Equally true, the nation is a tribe after it has grown and its branches have multiplied and become tribes. The nation is also a social structure whose bond is nationalism. The tribe is a social structure whose bond is tribalism. The family is a social structure whose bond is family ties. And global society is a social structure whose bond is humanity. These facts are self-evident. There is then the political structure of states which form the political map of the world. But why does the map of the world keep changing from one age to the next? The reason is that political structures may or may not be consistent with social structures. When political structures and social reality are congruent, as in the case of the nation state, it lasts and does not change. If a change is forced by external colonialism or internal collapse, it reappears under the banner of national struggle, national revival, or national unity. When a political struggle embraces more than one nation, its map will be torn up by each nation, gaining independence under the banner of its respective nationhood. Thus, the maps of the empires which the world has witnessed have been torn up because they were composed of a number of nations. When every nation clings strongly to its national identity and seeks independence, political empires are torn up and their components revert to their social origins. This is evidently clear through the history of the world when reviewed through the ages. But why were those empires made up of different nations? The answer is that the state is not a social structure like the family, the tribe, and the nation, but rather a political entity created by several factors, the simplest and foremost of which is nationalism. The national state is the only political form which is consistent with the national social structure. Its existence lasts unless it becomes subject to the tyranny of another stronger nationalism, or unless the political structure as a state is affected by that social structure in the form of tribes, clans, and families. A political structure is corrupted if it becomes subservient to the sectarian social structure of the family, tribe, or sect that wants to adopt its characteristics. Religious, economic, and military factors also contribute to form a state which differs from the basic national state. a common religion, as well as the requirements of economics or military conquests, may create a state which embraces several nations. Thus, in one age, the world witnesses a state or an empire which will disintegrate in another age. When the spirit of nationalism emerges stronger than religious loyalties, or conflict flares up between different nationalisms which were brought together, for example, by one religion, each nation becomes independent and recovers its social structure. That empire then disappears. The role of religion resurfaces when the religious spirit emerges stronger than the spirit of nationalism. Consequently, the various nationalisms are unified under the banner of religion until the national role appears once again, and so on. Welcome to the climate religion. All states which are composed of several nationalities for whatever reason, religion, economics, military power, or man-made ideology, will be destroyed by national conflict until each nation obtains its independence, because the social factor will inevitably triumph over the political factor. Despite political circumstances which necessitate the establishment of a state, the basis for the life of individuals is the family and extends to the tribe, the nation, and eventually to all humanity. The essential factor is the social factor. Nationalism is a permanent factor. Stress should be laid on social reality and family care in order to bring up an integrated, well-educated human. Care should then be given to the tribe as a social umbrella and a natural social school which develops its members at the post-family stage. The nation then follows. The individual learns social values mainly from the family and the tribe, which form a natural social structure created by no particular individual. Taking care of the family is in the interest of the individual, just as the care of the tribe is in the interest of the family, the individual, and the nation. It is part of the national identity. The social factor, the national factor, is the real constant dynamic force behind history. To disregard the national bond of human communities and to establish a political system in contradiction to social reality establishes only a temporary structure which will be destroyed by the movement of the social factor of these groups, i.e., the national integrity and dynamism of each community. These facts are innate in the life of humankind and are not intellectual conjectures. Every individual in the world should be aware of these realities and work accordingly so that his actions may be worthwhile. To avoid deviation, disorder, and damage in the life of human groups, which are the result of a lack of understanding and respect for these principles of human life, it is necessary to know these proven realities. Uh-oh. Chapter Woman. It is an undisputed fact that both man and woman are human beings. It follows as a self-evident fact that woman and man are equal as human beings. Discrimination against women by man is a flagrant act of oppression without justification, for woman eats and drinks as man eats and drinks. Woman loves and hates as man loves and hates. Woman thinks, learns, and comprehends as man thinks, learns, and comprehends. Woman, like man, needs shelter, clothing, and transportation. Woman feels hunger and thirst as man feels hunger and thirst. Woman lives and dies as man lives and dies. But why are there men and women? Human society is composed neither of men alone nor of women alone. It is made up naturally of men and women. Why were they not only men created? Why were not only women created? After all, what is the difference between men and women, or man and woman? Why was it necessary to create men and women? There must be a natural necessity for the existence of man and woman, rather than man only or woman only. It follows that neither of them is exactly like the other, and the fact that a natural difference exists between men and women is proved by the created existence of men and women. This necessarily means that there is a role for each one of them corresponding to the difference between them. Accordingly, there must be different prevailing conditions for each one in order that they perform their naturally different roles. To comprehend these roles, we must understand the difference in the created nature of man and woman, that is, the natural difference between the two. Women are females and men are males. According to gynecologists, women menstruate every month or so, while men, being male, do not menstruate or suffer during the monthly period. A woman, being a female, is naturally subject to monthly bleeding. When a woman does not menstruate, she is pregnant. If she is pregnant, she becomes, due to pregnancy, less active for about a year, which means that all her natural activities are seriously reduced until she delivers her baby. When she delivers her baby or has a miscarriage, she suffers puerperium, a condition attendant on delivery or miscarriage. As man does not get pregnant, he is not liable to the conditions which women, being female, suffer. I think that was postpartum. Afterwards, a woman may breastfeed the baby she bore. Breastfeeding continues for about 2 years. Breastfeeding means that a woman is so inseparable from her baby that her activity is seriously reduced. She becomes directly responsible for another person whom she assists in his or her biological functions. Without this assistance, that person would die. The man, on the other hand, neither conceives nor breastfeeds. End of gynecological statement. All these innate characteristics form differences because of which men and women are not the same. These characteristics in themselves are the realities that define male and female men and women. They assign to each of them a different role or function in life. This means that men cannot replace women in carrying out these functions. It is worthy of consideration that these biological functions are a heavy burden, causing women great effort and suffering. However, without these functions which women perform, human life would come to an end. It follows that it is a natural function which is neither compulsory nor voluntary. It is an essential function without which human life would come to a complete halt. Deliberate interventions against conception form an alternative to human life. In addition to that, there exists partial deliberate intervention against conception as well as against breastfeeding. All these are links in a chain of actions in contradiction to natural life, which is tantamount to murder. For a woman to kill herself in order not to conceive, deliver, and breastfeed is within the realm of deliberate artificial interventions in contradiction with the nature of life epitomized by marriage, conception, breastfeeding, and maternity. They differ only in degree. To dispense with the natural role of woman in maternity, nurseries replacing mothers, is a start in dispensing with the human society and transforming it into a merely biological society with an artificial way of life. To separate children from their mothers and to cram them into nurseries is a process by which they are transformed into something very close to chicks. For nurseries are similar to poultry farms into which chicks are crammed after they are hatched. Nothing else would be as appropriate and suitable to the human being and his dignity as natural motherhood. Children should be raised by their mothers in a family where the true principles of motherhood, fatherhood, and comradeship of brothers and sisters prevail, and not in an institution resembling a poultry farm. Even poultry, like the rest of the members of the animal kingdom, need motherhood as a natural phase. Therefore, breeding them on farms similar to nurseries is against their natural growth. Even their meat is artificial rather than natural. Meat from mechanized poultry farms is not tasty and may not be nourishing because the chicks are not naturally bred and are not raised in the protective shade of natural motherhood. The meat of wild birds is more tasty and nourishing because they are naturally fed. As for children who have neither family nor shelter, society is their guardian, and only for them should society establish nurseries and related institutions. It is better for them to be taken care of by society rather than by individuals who are not their parents. If a test were carried out to discover whether the natural propensity of the child is towards the mother or the nursery, the child would opt for the mother and not the nursery. Since the natural tendency of a child is towards its mother, she is the natural and proper person to give the child the protection of nursing. Sending a child to a nursery in place of its mother is coercive and oppressive and against its free and natural tendencies. Natural growth for all living things is free and healthy growth. To substitute a nursery for a mother is coercive action against free and sound growth. Children who are shipped off to a nursery, Children who are shipped off to a nursery are consigned compulsorily or by exploitation and simple-mindedness. No, we don't got it. They're enslaved. Thank you. They are driven to nurseries purely by materialistic and not by social considerations. If coercion and childish simple-mindedness were removed, they would certainly reject the nursery and cling to their mothers. The only justification for such an unnatural and inhuman process is the fact that the woman is in a position unsuitable to her nature, i.e., she is compelled to perform duties which are unsocial and anti-motherhood. A woman whose created nature has assigned to her a natural role different from that of man must be in an appropriate position to perform her natural role. Motherhood is the female's function, not the male's. Consequently, it is unnatural to separate the child from their mothers. Any attempt to take children away from their mothers is coercion, oppression, and dictatorship. The mother who abandons her maternity contradicts her natural role in life. She must be provided with her rights and with conditions which are non-coercive, unoppressive, and appropriate to her natural role. She can then fulfill her natural role under natural conditions. If the woman is forced to abandon her natural role regarding conception and maternity, she falls victim to coercion and tyranny. A woman who needs work that renders her unable to perform her natural function is not free and is compelled to work by need and, quote, in need, freedom is latent. Among suitable and even essential conditions which enable women to perform their natural role, which differs from that of men, are those very conditions which are proper for a human being who is incapacitated and burdened with pregnancy. Bearing another human being in her womb lessens her physical ability. It is unjust to place such a woman in this stage of maternity into circumstances of physical work incompatible with her condition. For pregnant women to perform such physical work is tantamount to punishment for their betrayal of their maternal role. It is the tax they pay for entering the realm of men, which is naturally alien to their own. The belief, even if it is held by a woman, that she carries out physical labor of her own accord, is not in fact true. She performs the physical work only because a harsh materialistic society has placed her, without her being directly aware of it, into coercive circumstances. She has no alternative but to submit to the conditions of that society, even though she may think that she works of her own accord. In fact, the alleged basis that there is no difference in any way between men and women deprives woman of her freedom. The phrase, in any way, is a monstrous deception. This idea will destroy the appropriate and necessary conditions which constitute the privilege which women ought to enjoy apart from men, in accordance with their distinctive nature, and upon which their natural role in life is based. To demand equality between man and woman in carrying heavy weights while the woman is pregnant is unjust and cruel. To demand equality between them in fasting and hardship while she is breastfeeding is unjust and cruel. To demand equality between them in any dirty work which stains her beauty and detracts from her femininity is unjust and cruel. Education that leads to work unsustainable for her nature is unjust and cruel as well. There is no difference between men and women in all that concerns humanity. None of them should marry the other against his or her will or divorce without a just trial or mutual agreement. Neither should a woman remarry without such agreement or divorce, nor a man without divorce or consent. The woman is the owner of the house because it is one of the suitable and necessary conditions for a woman who menstruates, conceives, and cares for her children. The female is the owner of the maternity shelter, which is the house, even in the animal world, which differs in many ways from that of the humans, and where maternity is also a duty according to nature. It is coercive to deprive the female of her shelter and the offspring of their mother. Woman is female. Being female means she has a biological nature that is different from that of the male. The female's biological nature, differing as it does from that of the male's, has imparted to women characteristics different from those of men in form and in essence. A woman's anatomy is different from that of a man's, just as the female differs in plants and animals. This is a natural and incontrovertible fact. In the animal and plant kingdoms, the male is naturally created strong and aggressive, while the female is created beautiful and gentle. Wah, wah. These are natural and eternal characteristics innate to living creatures, whether they are called human beings, animals, or plants. Are you done yet? In view of his different nature and in line with the laws of nature, the male has played the role of the strong and striving not by design, but simply because he is created that way. The female has played the role of the beautiful and the gentle involuntarily because she was just created so. This natural role is just, partly because it is natural and partly because it is the basic rule for freedom. All living creatures are created free, and any interference with that freedom is coercion. Not to adhere to these natural rules and to lack concern for their limits amounts to a wanton act of corruption against the values of life itself. Nature has been designed to be in harmony with the inevitability of life, from what is being to what will become. The living creature is a being who inevitably lives until it is dead. Existence between the beginning and the end of life is based on a natural law, without choice or compulsion. It is natural. It is natural freedom. In the animal, plant, and human realms, there must be a male and a female for life to occur from its beginning to its end. Not only do they exist, but they have to exercise with absolute efficiency the natural role for which they have been created. If their role is not being efficiently performed, there must be some defect in the organization of life caused by historical circumstances. This is the case of societies almost everywhere in the world today as they confuse the roles of men and women and endeavor to transform women into men. In harmony with nature and its subsequent purpose, men and women must be creative within their respective roles. To resist is retrogressive. It is directed against nature and destroys the basis of freedom, for it is hostile to both life and survival. Men and women must perform, not abandon, the roles for which they are created. Abandoning the role, or even a part of it, only occurs as a result of coercive conditions and under abnormal circumstances. The woman who rejects pregnancy, marriage, beautification, and femininity for reasons of health abandons her natural role in life under those coercive conditions of ill health. The woman who rejects marriage, pregnancy, or motherhood because of work abandons her natural role under similar coercive conditions. The woman who rejects marriage, pregnancy, or maternity without any concrete cause abandons her natural role as a result of a coercive and morally deviant circumstances. Thus, abandoning the natural roles of female and male in life can only occur under unnatural conditions which are contrary to freedom and are a threat to survival. Consequently, there must be a world revolution which puts an end to all materialistic conditions hindering women from performing their natural role in life, and so drives them to carry out men's duties in order to attain equal rights. Such revolution will inevitably take place, particularly in industrial societies, as a response to the instinct of survival, even without any instigator of revolution, such as... It's not blue. It ain't orange. The Green Book presents the ultimate solution to the problem of the proper instrument of government. All societies today look upon women as little more than commodities. The East regards her as a commodity to be bought and sold, while the West does not recognize her femininity. Driving women to do man's work is a flagrant aggression against the femininity with which she is naturally provided and which defines a natural purpose essential to life. Man's work obscures woman's beautiful features which are created for female roles. They are like blossoms which are created to attract pollen and to produce seeds. If we did away with the blossoms, the role of plants in life would come to an end. The natural embellishment in butterflies and birds and animal females exists to that natural vital purpose. If a woman carries out men's work, she risks being transformed into a man, abandoning her role and her beauty. A woman has full right to live without being forced to change into a man and to give up her femininity. Physical structure, he really would like us to understand this point. Physical structure, which is naturally different in men and women, leads to differences in the functions of the organs, which in turn leads to differences in the psyche, mood, emotions, as well as in physical appearance. A woman is tender. A woman is pretty. A woman weeps easily and is easily frightened. I do love those. In general, women are gentle and men are aggressive by virtue of their inbred nature. To ignore natural differences between men and women and to mix their roles is an absolutely uncivilized attitude, hostile to the laws of nature, destructive to human life, and a genuine cause for the wretchedness of human social life. Modern industrial societies which have made women adapt to the same physical work as men at the expense of their femininity and their natural role in terms of beauty, maternity, and serenity are materialistic and uncivilized. To imitate them is as stupid as it is dangerous to civilization and humanity. The question then is not whether women should or should not work, for this is a ridiculous materialistic presentation of the case. Work should be provided by the society to all able members who need work, men and women, on the condition that individuals work in their own fields and not be coerced into carrying out unsuitable work. For children to find themselves under adult working conditions is unjust and dictatorial too. It is equally unjust and dictatorial for women to find themselves under the working conditions of men. Freedom means that every human being gets proper education, which qualifies him or her for the work which suits him or her. Dictatorship means that human beings are taught that which is not suitable for them and are forced to do unsuitable work. Work which is appropriate to men is not necessarily appropriate to women, and knowledge that is proper for children does not necessarily suit adults. There is no difference in human rights between man and woman, the child and the adult, but there is no absolute identity between them as regards their duties. Minorities. What is a minority? What are its rights and responsibilities? How can the problem of minorities be solved according to the solution to various human problems presented by the third universal? There are only two types of minorities. One of them belongs to a nation which provides it with a social framework, while the other has no nation and forms its own social framework. The latter is the one that forms one of the historic groups which eventually constitute a nation by virtue of a sense of belonging and a common destiny. It is now clear that such a minority has its own social rights. Any encroachment on these rights by any majority is an act of injustice. Social characteristics are inherent and cannot be given or taken away. The political and economic problems of minorities can only be solved within a society controlled by the masses, in whose hands power, wealth, and arms should be placed. To view the minority as a political and economic substrata is dictatorial and unjust. Black people will prevail in the world. The latest age of enslavement has been the enslavement of blacks by white people. The memory of this age will persist in the thinking of black people until they have vindicated themselves. This tragic and historic event, the resulting bitter feeling, and the yearning or the vindication of a whole race constitute a psychological motivation of black people to vengeance and triumph that cannot be disregarded. In addition, the inevitable cycle of social history, which includes the yellow people's domination of the world when it marched from Asia, and the white people's carrying out a wide-ranging colonialist movement covering all the continents of the earth, is now giving way to the reemergence of black people. Black people are now in a very backward social situation, but such backwardness works to bring about their numerical superiority because their low standard of living has shielded them from methods of birth control and family planning. Also, their old social traditions place no limit on marriage, leading to their accelerated growth. The population of other races has decreased because of birth control restrictions on marriage and constant occupation in work, unlike the blacks, who tend to be less obsessive about work in a climate which is continuously hot. I just read it. I didn't write it, but the person who wrote it, I think, knows more than I do about black people. Yeah. Black people, not as easily enslaved in the contemporary game of enslavement because of the previous experience of the, kind with chains, as opposed to the kind with cell phones and debit cards. But enslavement it is still, no less. Next chapter. Education. Of black people? Like what? Education or learning is not necessarily that routinized curriculum and those classified subjects in textbooks which youths are forced to learn during specified hours while sitting in rows of desks. This type of education now prevailing all over the world is directed against human freedom. State-controlled education, which governments boast of whenever they are able to force it on their youths, is a method of suppressing freedom. It is a compulsory obliteration of a human being's talent, as well as a coercive directing of a human being's choices. It is an act of dictatorial destruction of freedom because it deprives people of their free choice, creativity, and brilliance. To force a human being to learn according to a set curriculum is a dictatorial act. To impose certain subjects upon people is also a dictatorial act. State-controlled and standardized education is, in fact, a forced stultification of the masses. All governments which set courses of education in terms of formal curricula and force people to learn those courses coerce their citizens. All methods of education prevailing in the world should be destroyed through a universal cultural revolution that frees the human mind from curricula of fanaticism, which dictate a process of deliberate distortion of man's tastes, conceptual ability, and mentality. This does not mean that schools are to be closed and that people should turn their backs on education, as it may seem to superficial readers. On the contrary, it means that society should provide all types of education, giving people the chance to choose freely any subjects they wish to learn. This requires a sufficient number of schools for all types of education. Insufficient numbers of schools restrict human freedom of choice, forcing them to learn only the subjects available while depriving them of the natural right to choose because of the unavailability of other subjects. Societies which ban or monopolize knowledge are reactionary societies which are biased towards ignorance and are hostile to freedom. Societies which prohibit the teaching of religion are reactionary societies biased towards ignorance and hostile to freedom. Societies which monopolize religious education are reactionary societies biased towards ignorance and hostile to freedom. Equally so are the societies which distort the religions, civilizations, and behaviors of others in the process of teaching those subjects. Societies which consider materialistic knowledge taboo are likewise reactionary societies, biased towards ignorance and hostile to freedom. Knowledge is a natural right of every human being, of which no one has the right to deprive him or her under any pretext, except in a case where a person does something which deprives him or her of that right. Ignorance will come to an end when everything is presented as it actually is, no more fake news, and when knowledge about everything is available to each person in the manner that suits him or her. Music and art. Humans, being backwards, are still unable to speak one common language. They tried. Did they try? Until this human aspiration is attained, which seems impossible, the expression of joy and sorrow, of what is good and bad, beautiful and ugly, comfortable and miserable, mortal and eternal, love and hatred, the description of colors, sentiments, tastes, and moods, all will be expressed according to the language each person speaks spontaneously. Behavior itself will result from the reaction produced by the feeling that the language creates in the speaker's mind. Learning a single language, whatever it may be, is not the solution for the time being. It is a problem that will inevitably remain without solution until the process of the unification of languages has passed through time, provided that the hereditary factor loses its effect on subsequent generations through the passage of sufficient time. The sentiment, taste, and mood of ancestors form those of their descendants. If those ancestors spoke different languages and their children, on the contrary, speak a single language, the offspring would not necessarily share common tastes in virtue of speaking a common language. Such common tastes can be achieved only when the new language imparts the taste and the sense transmitted by inheritance from one generation to the other. If one group of people wears white clothes and burns in mourning, and another group puts on black, the sentiment of each group will be adjusted according to these two colors, i.e. one group rejects the black color on such an occasion, while the other one prefers it, and vice versa. Such a sentiment leaves its physical effects on the cells as well as on the genes in the body. This adaptation will be transmitted by inheritance. The inheritors automatically reject the color rejected by the legator as a result of inheriting the sentiment of their legator. Consequently, people are only harmonious with their own arts and heritage. They are not harmonious with the arts of others because of heredity, even though those people who differ in heritage speak a single common language. Such a difference emerges between the groups of one people, even if it is on a small scale. To learn a single language is not the problem, and to understand others' arts as a result of learning their language is also not the problem. The problem is the impossibility of a real intuitional adaptation to the language of others. This will remain impossible until the effects of heredity, which are transmitted in the human body, come to an end. Mankind is still backward because humans do not communicate in one inherited common language. It is only a matter of time before mankind achieves that goal, unless civilization should relapse. But what if we achieve it digitally? Does that matter? I think it does. I think it's impossible digitally. Sport, horsemanship, and the stage. Sport is either private, like the prayer, which one performs alone inside a closed room, or public, performed collectively in open places, like the prayer, which is practiced corporately in places of worship. The first type of sport concerns the individuals themselves, while the second type is of concern to all people. It must be practiced by all and should not be left to anyone else to practice on their behalf. It is unreasonable for crowds to enter places of worship just to view a person or a group of people praying without taking part. It is equally unreasonable for crowds to enter playgrounds and arenas to watch a player of a team without participating themselves. Ooh. Sport is like praying, eating, and the feelings of coolness and warmth. It is unlikely that crowds will enter a restaurant just to look at a person or a group of people eat. It is also unlikely that they will let a person or a group of people enjoy warmth or ventilation on their behalf. It is equally illogical for the society to allow an individual or a team to monopolize sports while the society as a whole pays the costs of such a monopoly for the exclusive benefit of one person or team. In the same way, people should not allow an individual or a group, whether it is a party, class, sect, tribe, or parliament, to replace them in deciding their destiny and in defining their needs. Private sport is of concern only to those who practice it on their own and at their own expense. Public sport is a public need, and the public cannot be either democratically or physically represented by others in its practice. Physically, the representative cannot transmit to others how his body and morale benefit from sport. Democratically, no individual or team has the right to monopolize sport, power, wealth, or arms for themselves. Sporting clubs represent the basic organization of traditional sport in the world today. They retain all expenditure and public facilities allocated to sport in every state. These institutions are social monopolistic agencies, like all dictatorial political instruments, which monopolize authority, economic instruments which monopolize wealth, and traditional military instruments which monopolize arms.
As the era of the masses does away with the instruments monopolizing power, wealth, and arms, it will inevitably destroy the monopoly of social activity in such areas as sports, horsemanship, and so forth. The masses who queue to vote for a candidate to represent them in deciding their destiny act on the impossible assumption that this person will represent them and embody on their behalf their dignity, sovereignty, and point of view. However, those masses who are robbed of their will and dignity are reduced to mere spectators watching another person performing what they should naturally be doing themselves.
The same holds true of the crowds who, because of ignorance, fail to practice sport by and for themselves. Get those immune systems kicking, kids. They are fooled by monopolistic instruments which endeavor to stupefy them and divert them to indulging in laughter and applause and mask wearing instead. Sport, as a social activity, must be for the masses, just as power, wealth, and arms should be in the hands of the people.
Public sport is for all the masses. It is right of all people for their health and recreational benefit. It is mere stupidity to leave its benefits to certain individuals and teams who monopolize these, while the masses provide the facilities and pay the expenses for the establishment of public sports. The thousands who crowd the stadiums to view, applaud, and laugh are foolish people who have failed to carry out the activity themselves. They line up lethargically in the stands of the sports grounds and applaud these heroes who wrest from them the initiative, dominate the field, and control the sport, and in so doing, exploit the facilities that the masses provide. Originally, the public grandstands were designed to demarcate the masses from the playing fields and grounds, to prevent the masses from having access to the playing fields. When the masses march and play sport in the center of playing fields and open spaces, stadiums will be vacant and become redundant. This will take place when the masses become aware of the fact that sport is a public activity which must be practiced rather than watched. This is more reasonable as an alternative than the present custom of a helpless, apathetic majority that merely watches.
Grandstands will disappear because no one will be there to occupy them. Those who are unable to perform the roles of heroism in life, who are ignorant of the events of history, who fall short of envisaging the future, and who are not serious enough in their own lives, are the trivial people who fill the seats of the theaters and cinemas to watch the events of life in order to learn their course. They are like pupils who occupy school desks because they are uneducated and also initially illiterate. Those who direct the course of life for themselves have no need to watch life working through actors on the stage or in the cinema or on the YouTube. Horsemen who hold the reins of their horses likewise have no seat in the grandstands at the race council. If every person has a horse, no one will be there to watch and applaud. The sitting spectators are only those who are too helpless to perform this kind of activity because they are not horsemen.
Bedouin people show no interest in theaters and shows because they are very serious and industrious. As they have created a serious life, they ridicule acting.
Bedouin societies also do not watch performers, but perform games and take part in joyful ceremonies because they naturally recognize the need for these activities and practice them spontaneously. Boxing and wrestling are evidence that mankind has not rid itself of all savage behavior. Inevitably, it will come to an end when humanity ascends the ladder of civilization. Human sacrifice and pistol duels were familiar practices in previous stages of human evolution. However, those savage practices came to an end years ago.
People now laugh at themselves and regret such acts. This will be the fate of boxing and wrestling after tens or hundreds of years.
The more the people become civilized and sophisticated, the more they are able to ward off both the performance and the encouragement of these practices. So two strong metaphors exist here. Politics as instruments and as sport. Muammar al-Gaddafi, I'm sorry that you had to be killed in the way that the historical forces of society had you be killed, but I greatly appreciate how green this book was.